Started. I'm going to turn it over to Saron Lockett, our General Counsel, for a quick welcome.
Good morning, everyone. As you can tell, I am not Donovan Head. I am filling in this morning for our new executive director. I'm sure he will be online at some point later to welcome you all, but I am Saron Lockett, General Counsel for the State Charter Schools Commission. My team runs our petition process, so we are very happy to welcome you and to really get everyone acclimated and familiar with our petition process. As you know, the State Charter Schools Commission is really we aim to approve high quality charter schools to enhance the choices for Georgia students. Our mission is to improve public education by authorizing high quality charter schools that provide students with better educational options than they would otherwise receive in traditional school districts. We recently also adopted a vision, which is innovative and superior charter schools advancing education in every community. As you prepare to, embark upon this petition process, I also would encourage everyone to review our strategic plan. It is available on the website so that you can kind of understand the trajectory of the agency, some of our main objectives for charter school growth. We are hoping that today you'll kind of get some information to help you understand the foundation of becoming a state charter school, as well as some of the technical requirements and the processes. If you've done our Petitioner Bootcamp before, it's a little bit different this year. We're doing Bootcamp as well as a Petitioner orientation. The orientation will be closer to time to the petition deadline. So please, please, please make sure that you continue to visit our website. Make sure that you understand when that is happening. It'll be an online course offering, so you'll be able to review those materials at your leisure. But we are hoping to be able to provide more tips and best practices at a time where you may be able to make some last-minute tweaks of your petition or to prepare for your capacity interview. So again, I just want to say welcome. You will no doubt hear from our fearless leader, Donovan Head, at some point later today. But if you have any questions, Erin Wright, our Deputy General Counsel, runs the startup petition process. She'll be the first one you hear from today. She'll also be the point of contact for any questions thereafter. So welcome. We're excited to have so many of you online, and we are here to help. So let us know if we can answer any questions.
Thanks, Saron. So just really quickly, I'm going to go over the agenda for this afternoon, or this morning and afternoon. So as you saw on the calendar invite, this is a long day, and we recognize that, but we're going to try to give you as much helpful content as possible until 2 o'clock this afternoon. So we just finished up with the welcome. We're going to go into some of the nuts and bolts of the petitions process next. Then transition over to some fiscal feasibility. We will give you a break around 10:45. So I know everyone, it's hard to sit in front of a webinar for that long, but we'll try to give you a bit of a break there to use the restroom, get a cup of coffee, whatever you need, and then kick back off with some instruction on how to operate as an LEA, as a state charter school. We'll take a brief break for lunch. The webinar will stay up and operational, but we'll just be quiet so everyone can take a brief break to step away from their computers, take a lunch break, and then around 12:15 we'll start back with board overview and capacity building, a little bit of a primer on the pre-opening process and how to contemplate that for the petition phase, and then talking about the academic program. And the hope is to wrap up around 2 o'clock this afternoon. If you have questions throughout the rest of the presentation, please feel free to put those in the chat box. We'll be monitoring that throughout the rest of the presentations and trying to answer those kind of throughout. But if you want to also hold some questions till the end, we're happy to try to address those as well then. So if you think of something later in the day that you wish you would have asked for a morning presenter, go ahead and add that to the chat, and we'll try to address it as we're going through it. I also just want to highlight really quickly, I know Saron mentioned the orientation, but we also have a second webinar that's coming up on November 2nd. We will be going through the actual petition platform and budget template. So this is a training we do every year. We're just going to combine them this year and do them both together on November 2nd. The link for that is on this page. So when you get the copy of the training materials after today, you can use this to register. It's also on our website and in our newsletter. So if you haven't already registered for that webinar, please go ahead and do so. It's a live demo of both the platform and the budget webinar. And the future petitioners or previous petitioners have said it's been very helpful in making sure that they understand how to navigate through the system itself. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Erin Wright, our Deputy General Counsel, to begin with our first presentation on petition review. So Erin, give me one moment. I'll give you control of my computer.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. I see you still moving the mouse, so.
All right, you should be good.
Okay, awesome. Okay, welcome everyone. I'm so excited to kick off another petition cycle. I'm glad to have this opportunity to speak with you all today to let you know some of the more technical aspects of our process. As Saron mentioned, you know, feel free to reach out to me at any time during the process if you have a technical question, and I'll be glad to see if I can help. As well as I will monitor this chat box here as I go along through this presentation in case you have a question today as I am presenting. A quick overview of what we are going to cover. I'm going to start off with just some very basic information about charter schools, move on to a high-level overview of our petition process, and then we are going to get into some of the really you know, technical specific parts of petitions in for charter schools in Georgia, which concerns your selection of an attendance zone, the concurrent submission requirements that come along with that, as well as what our petition priorities look like this year, taking into account the strategic plan that Saron mentioned. Okay, so some basics, and I fully recognize if you are in this webinar today, you are most likely familiar with what a charter school is, or else you wouldn't be here. But I just wanted to throw this up to make sure that everyone is on the same page as we get started. So what is a charter school? So in Georgia, a charter school is considered a public school. It is an entity that is authorized by with the State Charter Schools Commission, and the school would be subject to a charter contract. So that charter contract is really the document that kind of manages the relationship between the authorizer and the charter school. And then we have what we call a flexibility waiver. So charter schools have a lot of flexibility from traditional educational requirements. You know, for example, teacher certifications, the ability to select what your educational model is going to be, what your curriculum looks like. You have a lot of flexibility in those areas. And in exchange for that, what the charter contract requires is that the school is held accountable to some high standards. In Georgia, with the State Charter Schools Commission, that those standards are spelled out in our Comprehensive Performance Framework, our CPF, which we'll get into later today. It's on our but schools are held annually to an evaluation under that criteria. And when the school comes up for renewal, the school is held to those standards for the past 5 years when we're thinking about renewal. And so that's what we call the flexibility waiver in Georgia. Okay, so in Georgia, who is eligible to be a charter school? In Georgia, you are required to be a registered nonprofit corporation. That means you are subject to Georgia's Nonprofit Corporation Code, and you have to register with the Georgia Secretary of State as a nonprofit corporation in Georgia. If you want more information on how to do that, you would need to visit the Secretary of State's website. They have a lot of resources on their website about how to become a nonprofit corporation. I will say one aspect of becoming a nonprofit organization is that you are required to have bylaws. I throw that in here because that is something that we require you to provide with your petition. It's a required mandatory upload. And I say that now because I want you to really be careful when you are thinking through and developing those bylaws, because you are going to be a nonprofit, and those bylaws are something that you are going to have to follow as a nonprofit, and they are something during the petition process that we take a good look at to better understand how your governance structure is set up, how you're going to operate, if there are any red flags that might, say to us that you haven't thoroughly thought through your governance structure. That's really an important document. And so I just want to highlight that now, because I know if you go down this path of wanting to submit a petition, you're going to be creating a nonprofit organization, you're going to be developing those bylaws. So I just want you to really make sure that you are thinking through that document when you're developing it. I also have on here who is not eligible to become a charter school in Georgia. So home study programs or schools, religious schools, private schools, those entities are specifically excluded in statute. So in Georgia, those entities are not permitted to be a charter school. And that is something, if we flag your petition as falling under one of those categories in the beginning, you will be withdrawn from consideration in the beginning and not be allowed to move to substantive review. So I just wanted to spell out those eligibility criteria up front. Okay, so something else you're going to be doing if you're developing a nonprofit organization is gathering governing board members. And so in Georgia, nonprofit corporations have to have at least 3 board members. And then specifically with charter schools, the State Charter Schools Act requires that those members have to be United States citizens, residents of Georgia, and cannot be an employee of the state charter school. In addition, the members cannot be an officer or serve on a board of directors of any organization that sells goods or services to that state charter school, or be an officer, member, or employee of a local board of education or an employee of a local school system. So those are specific requirements for state charter schools that are in our statute. And I have the statute down here if you want to reference it. Okay, so in Georgia, obviously we are presenting today on the process to become a state charter school, but the State Charter Schools Commission is only one authorizer in Georgia. There's also another path to become a charter school in Georgia, and that would be to become a locally approved charter school through the State Board of Education and the local Board of Education where you're going to locate. So those two entities can authorize charter schools as well in Georgia, and the process to become a locally approved charter school is up to the individual local school districts. And so if that is something that you are interested in, you would need to reach out to the local school district to learn more about their process. And I will say there is a difference here between being a state charter school and being a locally approved charter school. So locally approved charter schools actually fall under the local school district as the local education agency, what we call LEA. And so we'll have a training later today about what LEA means. Versus a state charter school is a standalone local education agency. And so that state charter school really is its own local school district. It is responsible for, it's solely responsible for meeting all of its LEA obligations, whereas that locally approved charter school falls under the local board of education as LEA. And so it doesn't have all of those additional LEA obligations that it is solely responsible to meet, whereas the state charter school is that standalone LEA and has to satisfy all of those LEA obligations itself. So I just want to clarify that there is a distinction there between a locally approved charter school and a state charter school. Oh, how do I go back, Kristen? I clicked twice. Thank you. Okay, so what is the role of a charter school authorizer? And so as I just said, you know, the State Charter Schools Commission is an authorizer, but then also local boards of education in conjunction with the State Board of Education is an authorizer. So the role of an authorizer is a little bit different than I think a lot of people initially, you know, think that our role is. So what we really do is we are responsible to evaluate charter schools, you know, initially evaluate whether we should approve those schools. We set the academic, financial, and operational expectations, like I said, with that flexibility waiver. So the authorizer is the one that is setting those expectations that the school has to meet in order to continue operating. We also monitor the school's performance, and what we're looking for there is really just, is that school meeting those expectations, and are they in compliance with legal requirements? And then we also hold schools accountable for legal requirements. So an authorizer, so that's what we are responsible to do. What we do not do is get involved in school level governance. And so charter schools have a lot of autonomy to make school level decisions. So even though the authorizer might set the expectations, the school is, and the governing board is the entity that determines how they are going to meet those expectations. And so as an authorizer, we don't get involved in dictating how, like the model, the curriculum, you know, the exact financial programs that you use, how you manage your fund, like all of those, you know, specifics, your financial policies. We don't get involved in all of that. As long as it meets legal requirements, we don't get involved in all of that. We're also not an appellate entity for school level decisions. So I think a lot of times, you know, stakeholders think that if they disagree with a governing board's decision, they can come to the authorizer, who would act as an appellate entity for that decision. And that's only the case if there is a legal issue. So if it's, or if the governing board is clearly not handling its obligation to respond to stakeholders, or there's a legal issue. That's the only time that we would really get involved there. We're not going to act as an appellate entity to overturn something that the governing board has decided is in its best interest. So that is what we would call a school level decision, and we would generally respect the autonomy of that as long as there is no legal implications. We also don't directly provide services for students. That's solely under the school's responsibility, and obviously we do not set governing board policies. So I just wanted to distinguish that in the beginning. You know, what our role is really to, you know, evaluate, monitor, set expectations for schools, and it's the school's responsibility to make those school level governance decisions. Okay, so we're going to move on to a very high level overview of our petition process. I say high level because, as Serona alluded to in the beginning, we are going to have another training coming up, and it's what we're calling the petitioner orientation. And in that orientation is where we're really going to be diving more deeply into some tips and best practices related to your petition. And so this is meant to really be a high level overview for what are the base level requirements for our process. Okay, so to start, I want to just say that this whole process, the process to submit a petition for a state charter school is really a high bar, a high standard. I just want to remind everyone, when you submit a petition for a charter school, you're requesting to receive taxpayer funds in order to educate children, a very basic, serious function of society is to educate children. And so we just want to remind you, submitting a petition is something that you should highly regard, and I kind of want you to view it as a formal business proposal almost when you submit the petition. And I say that because, if you have a business proposal, normally an investor might want to see there is evidence of sales, market demand, you've tested the product, all of this kind of stuff. Well, obviously we do not have that when it comes to petitions. The petition is really a proposal about what you are proposing to do with a charter school. So what you can do is make sure that you have done all of the front end work, as much of that as possible by the time you come to submit a petition. And so the petition shouldn't just be ideals, plans to do things where you haven't actually, for example, had a discussion with vendors about possible services. You really should have done as much front-end work as possible by the time that you submit the petition. You just really want to make sure that you are submitting this as a formal proposal. You're trying to convince the state of Georgia that you deserve millions of dollars in order to meet these high performance expectations when educating Georgia's children. So I just want to remind you of that. A petition is not a guaranteed approval. It really is just what's starting the process so that the State Charter Schools Commission can evaluate whether you're proposing something that is likely to be a high quality school choice in Georgia. Okay, so our startup petition timeline for this year, our board just approved this last month. So we have established March 15th, 2024 as our submission deadline. So that is the deadline that petitions will be due. I don't have this up on the slide, but the portal will open October 30th, 2023. So at the end of this month is when the petition portal will open. The petition portal will remain open up until March 15th, 2024. So during that time, you can start a petition and you can continue to work on it and access it during that time. But all petitions must be submitted in order to be considered by March 15th, 2024. The next real step in that process would be interviews beginning on June 3rd, 2024. We've kind of set aside 3 weeks in June to potentially schedule interviews, but we always like to go ahead and specify the date that those interviews will begin so that you can plan. Because when we go to schedule interviews, what happens is we will let you know the date of your interview. And generally there is not much wiggle room with that date because we are trying to coordinate a lot of different schedules. And so we go ahead and give you these dates up front so that you can make sure that you are available throughout the time that interviews could happen to make sure that you are available to attend that interview. The next step is that we anticipate that our recommendations to the board would begin with our July board meeting. Okay, so with the State Charter Schools Commission, our process for petitions happens completely within an electronic submission portal. So we require all petitions to be submitted through that online fluid review portal. We will not consider petitions submitted via any other method. So you cannot submit a petition to us via email, you cannot drop one off, you cannot mail one to us. Honestly, we don't even have a hard copy of the petition. The only way that you're even able to view or access a petition is through the portal. So all petitions must be submitted through the portal. And then, as Kristen alluded to, in November, we are going to have a webinar that specifically focuses, well, the first part of it will specifically focus on how to use that online portal. And once again, it's going to open October 30th. If you have any questions or concerns with trying to use it, once you get into it, feel free to reach out to us. We're glad to help, but make sure that you plan to attend that webinar that will orient you to the system. Okay, so our petition has three main parts to it. There is a narrative section, the budget templates, and the required uploads. So the narrative is going to be the biggest chunk of the petition. So that's where we really want to learn and understand exactly what you are proposing. We often say there's going to be a part of the petition that allows you to give us additional documents that you think might be helpful for us. But we always say, don't rely on those documents to explain what you're proposing. You want to make sure that your narrative is as complete and comprehensive as possible so that we don't have any questions. Because it's possible if you provide us additional uploads that we didn't require, it's possible that we might not look at those. We might not get to them. Because these are the three main things that we're looking at. If you give us additional documents, we might look at them if we have a question, but we're not guaranteed to. So we always like to say that you need to make sure that your narrative part of the petition is really as comprehensive as possible, and don't rely on any other documents that you might upload. When it comes to the budget template, we have two templates that we require you to complete and upload, and Carmen will get into this next, but there's a 100% budget template and a 65% budget template, and that is related to your enrollment projections, so 100% of enrollment versus 65% of enrollment. And so those are required documents to upload, and then we have other required documents as well that we'll get into later today, especially like concurrent submission documents, the proof of nonprofit registration, community engagement documentation, conflict of interest forms. So that starts. Okay, so the petition review process. So once you submit your petition in March, we immediately take it and we do what we call a legal compliance and budget screen of that petition. So when I'm talking about legal compliance, we are going through that petition to make sure, are you a registered nonprofit? Did you meet concurrent submission requirements? Are you proposing to discriminate against any kind of protected class? So those are the type of legal issues where if you have missed something, you didn't become a registered nonprofit organization, that's something that could get your petition withdrawn from consideration during the legal compliance review. We also do a initial budget screen when we get the petition. And so it's very, very high level. What we're making sure is just, did you use the templates that we require? So you have to use the templates that are in the petition. You can't use your own budget template. You can't use the Georgia Department of Education's budget template. You have to use the State Charter Schools Commission budget templates. And so what we're looking is, did you use those templates? Did you fully complete the budget? Is there any kind of revenue that is not supported by documentation? Very high level stuff. If you pass those two reviews, you move on to substantive petition review, and that's where we're really diving into the substance of your petition. What are you proposing? Does it make sense? Are you going to provide a high quality school choice option in Georgia? I'll say too, the State Charter Schools Commission during substantive petition review could determine that your petition has substantial deficiencies. If so, it is possible that your petition could be removed from consideration at that point. So you want to make sure that your petition has fully completed the entire petition, answered all of the narrative questions as comprehensively as possible, and really made sure, and we'll cover this more in petition orientation, so I don't want to spend a long time on this, but just really made sure that your whole petition is consistent, meets all the LEA obligations, all of that kind of stuff. So we will talk about that more in petition orientation, so make sure you tune in to that to learn more about the substantive petition review process. The next step is a capacity interview. So if you make it past the substantive petition review, we will have a capacity interview for the governing board and any other important members of the school. Sometimes petitioners have school leaders already identified, and so that capacity interview is between a panel from the State Charter Schools Commission and the petitioner, and that is what is going to be in June. After that, commission staff will make a recommendation to our board on whether we recommend approval or denial of the petition, and our board will vote. And that is what we anticipate having in July. Okay, so I think I might have already covered a lot of this, so we can just skip through this. Legal compliance and budget screening. This is that first step after you submit the petition. We're just really making sure, did you comply with all state, federal laws and technical requirements for the petition. Substantive review, again, are you proposing a school that is going to be a high quality school in Georgia? Are you proposing things that are consistent with state educational goals? We're going to do an in-depth budget analysis, make sure that your proposal is something that is financially viable, really dive into that substantive stuff. And once again, I'm not spending a lot of time on this today because that is something we're going to cover more during petitioner orientation. If you make it past the substantive review, we'll have the capacity interview. I referenced earlier that there would be an interview panel. So the interview panel on behalf of the State Charter Schools Commission is composed of staff, commissioners, and experts. So we do bring in experts as well to help us evaluate the petitions, and they will be sitting on the interview panel when they meet with the petitioner. And the focus of that interview is really relating to the governing board and the school leadership's capacity to operate a charter school. And so we really, we've already gotten the petition, so we've evaluated your proposal in writing. And so, really what the capacity interview is meant to do is evaluate the petitioner's capacity to do what they said they were going to do in the petition. And also, if there's any kind of questions that we still had after reviewing the petition, that's the time that we would ask those questions. And so that's really the chance for us to get to know the petitioner. After the interview I referenced, staff would make recommendations to our State Charter Schools Commission board. And that would be a recommendation for approval or denial. And I will note, if it was going to be a recommendation, we always let you know as the petitioner what the recommendation is going to be in advance of that board vote. And so generally a couple of weeks before the commission board meets, we will send a letter to the petitioner letting them know this is going to be a recommendation for approval or this is going to be a recommendation for denial. If it's a recommendation for denial, in the past, petitioners have indicated a desire to withdraw their petition instead of having it presented as a recommendation for denial to the board. And so at that point, if you received a recommendation for denial, you would have that option to withdraw from the petition's process. And then finally, if the State Charter Schools Commission approved the petition, it would then move on to the State Board of Education. So in Georgia, the State Board of Education is still the state educational agency that's responsible for all public education in the state of Georgia. And so all of the state charter school approvals go before the State Board of Education to review them and affirm them. And so generally that's how it's operated in the past, is that the State Board of Education would receive the approval, and if they agreed with it, they would affirm that approval. And at that point, we could enter into a charter contract with the school. Okay, so with the last 20 minutes that we have left, we're going to jump into the more technical part of the petition process, which is the attendance zone. Feel free if you have questions now, or if you think of questions later, because I know this can be a lot, especially if this is your first time applying to be a state charter school. I know that these technical requirements can be a lot. So if there's something that you think of later and you're like, oh, I'm not exactly sure, how this works, or I have a question about this, feel free to reach out to me and I will be glad to help clarify. Okay, so in Georgia, when you submit a state charter school petition, all petitioners have to select one of two attendance zones. So you have to have an attendance zone. Your petition at the very beginning is going to ask you, what is your attendance zone? So you have to select either a statewide attendance zone or a defined attendance zone. A statewide attendance zone is where you have demonstrated community interest in and a plan to recruit students from a majority of the school districts in Georgia. If that petition were to be approved, the school would then have to accept enrollment of students from any local school system in Georgia. A defined attendance zone, on the other hand, is where a school has a demonstrated community interest and a plan to recruit students from less than a majority of Georgia school districts. If that petition is approved, then the school may only accept enrollment of students from the local school systems in its attendance zone. And so what we're really trying to get at there, and this is something that you're going to have evidence of, if you select, especially if you select a statewide attendance zone, you will see in the petition instructions that you are required to provide evidence of that community interest in and a plan to recruit students from a majority of school districts in Georgia. And that evidence will need to specifically include details about location relevant to school districts in Georgia. And so let me use an example. So say your community interest is you've gotten a bunch of intent to enroll forms, for example. There's a lot of different evidence that you can provide of community interest. One of those is intent to enroll forms. Sometimes schools have petitions where they have interested stakeholders sign a petition. Sometimes they have community interest meetings where they have people come and they have like sign-in sheets where those people sign in that they came to this meeting. All of that documentation, what you need to make sure you do is have those stakeholders indicate where their residence is, where they're from, and how that is related to a school district zone in Georgia. So generally what we see is zip codes. That's a very easy way to do it. So, if you have a sign-in sheet, what we see is you'd have a column there where the stakeholder would include their zip code. If you have intent to enroll forms, you might even have their full address. But that's what we're really looking for, is that you have evidence of community interest in a majority of school districts in Georgia. So, based on that evidence, based on the location of those stakeholders, that's what we're looking for if you choose a statewide attendance zone. If instead what you're really trying to do is target and serve a subsection of students from just a smaller geographic region in Georgia, then what you are really trying to do is serve a defined attendance zone. And so that's what you should select, is a defined attendance zone in that situation. We still would like to see evidence, though, of community interest for those districts in your defined attendance zone. But that is the difference between statewide attendance zone and defined attendance zone. So, and if you choose a defined attendance zone, the petition will also ask you to list the school systems that are included in that defined attendance zone. And I'll just remind you, in Georgia, school systems are not only counties. We also have some school systems in Georgia that are cities. And so just make sure when you're including your defined attendance zone and all of the school systems in that attendance zone that you are really making sure that you include all of the districts that you intend to serve, that you intend to enroll students from. Okay, so this slide is basically what I was just saying. When you select an attendance zone, you want to make sure that you have evidence of that community interest to support the selected attendance zone. It has to reflect the location of the stakeholders. Then the one thing I'll add is that failure to do this, so if you fail to provide this documentation to support the selected attendance zone, that may result in withdrawal of your petition from the petition cycle. And so you remember, you know, when I was going through what the petition process looks like, the first step that we do after you submit the petition is we evaluate the petition for legal compliance, for a budget screen, and for compliance, you know, just with general technical requirements. And so this is one of the things that we will be looking at is, do you have documentation to support your selected attendance zone? And if you don't, your petition could be withdrawn from consideration. Okay, so we talked about how to select your attendance zone. So we talked about how to select if you're a statewide attendance zone versus if you're a defined attendance zone. Along with that, depending on what attendance zone you select, you have concurrent submission requirements. And that applies to all petitioners except for, I'll go ahead and say this first little bullet that you see on the slide, except for a fully virtual school. So if you are a fully virtual school with a statewide attendance zone, you do not have to submit, you do not have to comply with any kind of concurrent submission requirements. If you are anything other than a fully virtual school with a statewide attendance zone, you have concurrent submission requirements, and you have to meet them, and you have to provide evidence of those in your petition. So if you're a hybrid, if you are, you know, half virtual, half in person, you have concurrent submission requirements. The only exception is for fully virtual schools with a statewide attendance zone. So what, and also, oh yeah. Concurrent submission requirements is something else that we evaluate up front. So when you submit your petition and we're evaluating it for legal compliance, one of the things that we're looking for is, did you provide evidence of compliance with those concurrent submission requirements? And if not, your petition could be removed from consideration. Okay, so what are the concurrent submission requirements? So we'll start off with a defined attendance zone. What are the concurrent submission requirements? A petition with a defined attendance zone has to submit their petition also, in addition to the state commit. Sorry, let me take a drink of water. I've been talking a lot. Okay, so when you submit your petition to the State Charter Schools Commission, if you're a defined attendance zone, you also have to submit that petition to the local Board of Education where you're proposing to locate for action, and to each local school district from where you're proposing to enroll students for informational purposes. So let me highlight the difference there between the for action and the for informational purposes. So the local Board of Education where you're intending to locate, you need to submit your petition to them for action according to their process for petitions. So you remember in the very beginning, I talked about if you want to submit to a local Board of Education, you have to adhere to their petition process deadlines and requirements. And so that's what you will need to do here if you're a defined attendance zone. You need to determine what local board of education is going to be the location where the school is proposed to locate. You need to find out what their submission requirements are for a petition, and you need to submit your petition to them for action. Also, if there are other districts where you would like to enroll students from, but you're not planning to locate there, but you would like to include those districts in your defined attendance zone, you need to submit your petition to them. However, you're only submitting your petition to them for informational purposes. So you're not asking them to act on that petition. You're just kind of giving them a heads up about the petition. So that's the difference here. You submit for action your petition to the local board of education where you want to locate. Any other district that's going to be in your attendance zone, but you're not going to locate there, but you want to be able to enroll students from those districts, you need to submit your petition to them for informational purposes. The key here, and this is why it matters, the for action, is that the State Charter Schools Commission is actually able to act on your state charter school petition unless and until that local board of education where you submitted your petition for action denies that petition. So the State Charter Schools Commission, let me say it again, the State Charter Schools Commission cannot vote to approve or deny your state charter school petition unless and until the local board of education where you're wanting to locate denies it. And so that's why it's so important here to make sure that you submit for action to the local board of education where you're wanting to locate, because our ability to act is dependent on that local board of education, what they do with the petition. So what qualifies as a local denial so that the State Charter Schools Commission can act on your defined attendance zone petition? Once again, this is only relevant to schools that are planning to select a defined attendance zone. So once again, the State Charter Schools Commission cannot act on your petition. So you submit it to us. You go ahead and submit your petition to us, even if you don't have a local decision. But we can't act on that petition. We can't approve or deny that petition unless and until that local board has denied the petition first. So what counts as a local denial so that the State Charter Schools Commission can act on the petition? A denial would be, obviously, if you submit that petition to a local board and they vote to deny your petition. Obviously, that would be a denial, and the State Charter Schools Commission would have the authority thereafter to act on the petition as a state charter schools petition. But the other option would be if the local board of education failed to act on your petition within 90 days of submission, and you did not request an extension to give the local board additional time. So there is a requirement under the State Board of Education for local districts to act on charter school petitions within 90 days. So that's the requirement. And then the State Charter Schools Commission rule says that if they have not acted on that petition within 90 days, and the petitioner did not request an extension or otherwise give the local board additional time, then the State Charter Schools Commission can treat that as a denial and act on your petition. The other option would be if you did give the local board additional time to act past that 90 days. However, that additional time expired and the local board had still not acted, then that could be treated as a denial. What is not considered a denial is if you submit your petition to the local board for action and they approve your petition. If they approve your petition, obviously you would continue in the process as a local charter school at that point, and the State Charter Schools Commission would no longer consider your state charter school petition. Also not a denial is if the local board rejects or withdraws your petition because you fail to adhere to their technical requirements, process, or deadlines. And that kind of goes along hand in hand with the next bullet point. if you fail to work with the local board in good faith seeking approval. So, you know, when you submit that petition to the local board of education for action, you need to do so in good faith, trying to seek approval from that local board. You know, you're not submitting just in order to receive a denial so that the State Charter Schools Commission can act. You are required to work with that local board, submit that petition according to their process, and work with them through that process in good faith, seeking approval. So if they, you know, rejected or withdrew your petition because you didn't submit it by their deadline, if you didn't adhere to their technical requirements, if you deviated from their process, we would not consider that to be a denial. So I just want to clarify that, you know, the difference between what is considered a denial so that the State Charter Schools Commission can act versus what is not considered a denial. And then something new that we are going to be doing this year related to local board of education denial is that we are going to be requiring that you submit a certification of local board of education denial when there is a denial and you would like to request the State Charter Schools Commission act on your state charter school petition. Once again, this only applies to defined attendance zone petitioners. But once that local board has denied your petition, or if you're past the 90 days and they still haven't acted on your petition and you haven't granted them additional time past the 90 days, you would fill out the certification and you would submit it to the State Board of, to the State Charter Schools Commission, certifying that there has been a local board of education denial and requesting that the State Charter School Commission act on your state charter school petition. Also, when you submit your petition to the local board, that petition is required to be substantively, gosh, I can never say that word, the same as the petition that you submit to the State Charter Schools Commission. The only, you know, and when I say that, you know, we're really talking about, is it the same model? Is it the same operational plan that you're proposing? Is it the same kind of financial plan? The only differences will be that your state charter school petition will also include how you're going to satisfy your local education agency LEA obligations. So obviously a submission to a local board of education would not include that because the local board of education serves as the LEA, but your submission to the State Charter Schools Commission would include how you're going to meet those LEA obligations. Also, the funding will be a little bit different, obviously, because the State Charter Schools Commission gives a supplement to make up for not receiving local funding when you're a state charter school. So the budget will obviously, the numbers will look a little different, but otherwise the petition should be the same. Okay, moving on from defined attendance zone. This is much simpler, so I won't spend that much time on it. Statewide attendance zone. If you select a statewide attendance zone, you still have concurrent submission requirements unless you're a fully virtual school. So you would have to submit a petition to the local board of education where you're wanting to locate for informational purposes only. So you don't have to submit a petition for action to any local board of education. You just need to submit it where you're wanting to locate to that local board of education for informational purposes. And we have a nice little chart here. These slides will be available on our website. So if you want to go back and look at this slide to help you determine what your concurrent submission requirements are, feel free. Once again, you know, you'll have to provide us evidence of your concurrent submission, that you've met those requirements when you submit your petition. And so you want to make sure you fully understand what all of your requirements are, and that you have that evidence to give us when you submit the petition. Along with that, I know sometimes there are some tricky timing considerations because the local board of education, the local boards of education across the state have autonomy to develop their own charter school petition processes. And so what ends up happening, and I can't see the bottom of this slide, Kristen, but that's fine. I could just say what it is. But so what ends up happening is because the local boards have the autonomy to develop their own processes and timelines, sometimes those timelines don't match up exactly with what our timelines are at the State Charter Schools Commission. So if you have any questions about, I'm going to go through this slide, but if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me. So if you're submitting to the local board of education for action, you would submit to the local board according to its deadlines that contemplate a 2025-2026 school year opening. So that would be the same as what we are contemplating here at the State Charter Schools Commission. So anytime that you submit a petition to us, you are contemplating opening in basically what amounts to 2 years, because we always account for one pre-planning year before you actually begin operations. And so when you submit to us for what's coming up to be the fiscal year 24 petition cycle, you are really contemplating what would be starting operations in the school year 2025 to 2026. And so the concurrent submission requirement would be that you submit to the local board according to whatever its deadlines are that contemplate a school year beginning operations for that same time frame of 2025 to 2026. When you go to submit, if that local deadline for submission comes before the State Charter Schools Commission's deadline, you would submit your local petition by that local deadline, and then you would just include evidence of that submission when you apply to us. If their deadline falls after you submit to us, if it comes after your submission of a state charter school petition, just upload evidence of that deadline with the State Charter Schools petition. And then once you submit that local petition, just email us evidence of that submission once it's been submitted. If you don't meet that local deadline, though, your petition could be withdrawn from consideration. So you always have to make sure that you meet the local Board of Education's petition process and deadlines, no matter what. If you cannot locate any local Board of Education published petition deadlines, reach out. A lot of times these local boards will have their petition deadlines posted online. If you don't see them online, pick up the phone, email them, reach out to them to confirm what their process is. Local board petition processes are not subject to the State Charter Schools Commission. I know sometimes petitioners will reach out to us and they'll say, we can't find what the local board's petition process is. And I always just have to refer them back to that local Board of Education and to the State Board of Education, i.e. the Georgia Department of Education, because those are the rules that those local districts are subject to. They are not subject to, they do not fall under the authority of the State Charter Schools Commission when it comes to their local petition processes. And so if you're unclear about what their processes are, just reach out to them and or the Georgia Department of Education.
Hey, Erin.
Yes, I know I'm about out of time.
No. I was just going to say, you've got a couple, we've been trying to answer some of the questions in the chat. You have 2 that are on this issue. I thought it might be good for, I'll read those out so you can answer them before you move to the next few slides. Okay. So the first question is, so as an example, if I plan to apply to Fulton and serve all of Metro Atlanta, but I must apply to all other Metro counties for informational purposes, Cobb's timeline is significantly different from the other counties and the deadline to submit intent to apply has passed. Does that mean I cannot serve students in Cobb? That's part 1.
Okay. So, and I'm only familiar, I normally am not super familiar with local district timelines. I am a little bit more familiar with Cobb's just because of, some conversations that we've had with them. I will say when you go to their website, look at what their petition process is when it comes to a school opening in 2025 to 2026. I believe the process that they have up on their website right now contemplates a school opening in 2024 to 2025. So that process that they have on their website right now, and they might have changed, I haven't looked for a while, but that process, if it still contemplates 2024 to 2025, that would not be the local process that you would need to submit under for concurrent submission, because it is not contemplating a school opening in 2025 to 2026. So you would need to reach out to them to find out more about what their process is, if they have it yet. They might not have it yet for a school that plans to open in 2025 to 2026. Does that answer the full question, Saron? I know there was another part of that.
I think so. The second question is, if I plan to serve students from the metro and the petition is approved by the local board, can I serve students outside that county?
So when you submit a defined attendance zone petition, you are identifying, number one, the local school district where you intend to locate. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you also identify all of those school districts where you would like to enroll students from. So all of those districts are included as your defined attendance zone. If you were to be approved, all of those districts would be included as your attendance zone in your charter contract, and you could enroll students from any of those districts. However, you would only be able to locate in the school district that you had submitted your petition for action to and that denied that petition. But you could enroll students from any of those other school districts, assuming you submitted the petition for informational purposes to them. You would be able to enroll students from any of those districts. Is that it, Saron?
Yeah, I think to clarify, that's if your petition was approved by the State Charter Schools Commission. I think it looks like this requester is asking if the petition is approved by the local board.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and in that instance, typically you would only be able to serve students within that local board of education unless that local board entered into an MOU where there were or the structure of the petition was such that there was some shared responsibility by the local boards. That's again one of those local questions. And so that's kind of something you'd have to sort out with the local board of education in Godot. There is a state board rule that kind of contemplates what happens or what the process is for local boards that may want to enroll, share in responsibilities for enrolling students. And so we'll get you that, reach out to us. We'll make sure you have the rule, but that's something you'll have to reach out to those individual local boards or Georgia Department of Education on from a process standpoint. We do have a couple of other questions, Erin.
I don't have them up in my chat, so I'm sorry.
I'll read them out. I know it's tough to follow along, but I'll try to read them out. The next one is reasonable intent to apply statements would need to be from families with children of appropriate age projections for 2 years in the future, correct or no?
I don't know that, we don't require the evidence to get that detailed. I would think that when you're having conversations with the community in order to collect this evidence, you are letting them know what your time frame is about when you anticipate opening or you to be approved. So I will just leave that up to individual petitioners, whether, to include the evidence of when the school is going to open in that documentation. Is that what the question's asking, Saron?
Yes, I think I would just like to pan out a little bit. What you're essentially providing is documentation that there's interest in your school from students likely to attend within the community you plan to serve. We haven't gone into the funding piece of this yet, but funding is very much tailored to your ability to enroll the appropriate amount of students to sustain the school financially. And so there's an aspect of that where what we're looking for is that you can actually garner the enrollment that you intend. You've done some due diligence in that community to show that you can garner the level of enrollment that will financially sustain your program. And so that includes interest from families in that area. We don't necessarily require parents to say, yes, 2 years from now, I will attend this school, but we need enough information to show that the plan is financially viable. The next question is, To receive a statewide attendance zone, we would need to demonstrate interest from families in Georgia school districts who would never be able to actually attend the school due to commute. If half of school districts are required, many of these would be beyond an hour's drive.
Yeah, so in that instance, if what you're really wanting to do is serve a more limited geographic area, then what we would suggest is that that is something more consistent with a defined attendance zone than a statewide attendance zone. I believe that would just answer the question, unless you have something else to add, Saron.
No, that is it. And I think with the one other question we'll answer here in the chat. So you can move on. I just wanted to make sure we got some of those while we were somewhat in the same subject.
Okay, thanks. Okay, I think this is our last slide too on, this is our last slide on concurrent submission related items. And then we'll just quickly move on to petition priorities because I know I've run out of time. We wanted to add this slide this year to kind of bring it to your attention up front about the local board timelines. Again, this is only really applying to petitioners that are selecting a defined attendance zone, but we want to make sure that you're thinking through what that local board petition process looks like, especially when it comes to how it might impact how you proceed through the State Charter Schools Commission petition. Because, you know, once again, if you're submitting for action to that local board, what you're really doing is you're trying to seek approval from that local board, and you have now entered their petition process. And so you want to just kind of contemplate how those two timelines kind of mesh up, and where you might need to consider some implications that might arise from how those timelines might kind of overlap or not overlap. So the big thing I want to call to your attention here is, once again, back to that 90-day rule. As I said, if the local board has not acted on your petition in 90 days and the petitioner hasn't granted them additional time, then the State Charter Schools Commission can act. Therefore, at that 90-day mark, you really have an important consideration. You need to decide at that point whether you're going to offer that local board additional time to consider your petition. What's important is at that 90-day mark, you will not know yet what the State Charter School Commission's recommendation is going to be. You will not know what our staff recommendation is going to be. You won't know whether it's going to be a recommendation for approval or a recommendation for denial when you get to that, if you get to that 90-day mark, and the local board has still not made a decision. I don't want to presume that all local boards don't make decisions in 90 days. But it is possible that you might get to 90 days with your local board petition and you haven't received a decision. So at that time, you just need to keep in mind, at that time, you need to decide whether you're going to offer the local board additional time. If you give them additional time, because you think that they might approve you, if you just want to make sure you keep your options open because you don't know if you might get a denial from the State Charter Schools Commission, if you give them that more time past the 90 days, just keep in mind that that is going to mean that the State Charter Schools Commission cannot act on your petition. So we're not allowed to act on your petition if you give the local board additional time past that 90 days. If you give them that additional time and they end up denying you and then you come to us and we approve you, just keep in mind that could delay obviously that would delay an approval from the State Charter Schools Commission, and it would also potentially reduce the time that you have during that pre-opening year to prepare for school operations. The flip side is, keep in mind, like if you don't get the local board more time after 90 days, again, you don't know whether the State Charter Schools Commission is going to be recommending approval or denial. If we're recommending denial, and now you haven't given the local board more time to consider your petition after 90 days, that local board might consider that they don't have the authority anymore to act on your local petition. So if you didn't give them more time after 90 days to consider your petition, they might determine they no longer have the ability to act on your petition because you didn't give them additional time. And then, you know, obviously, if the State Charter Schools Commission makes a recommendation for denial, you're looking at not having any approval during this cycle, and you would have to obviously just wait and apply for the next year. So I just want to call all of that out to make sure that you're thinking about all of this up front, so that you know, when you get to that 90 days, what all things you need to be considering. Okay, very briefly here, so I can switch it over to Carmen. I just want to touch on our petition priorities, which were also approved last month by our board. They are the same as the previous year. So if you have submitted a petition to us last year, the petition priorities are going to be the same again this year. So our petition priorities are really based, they grew out of our strategic plan that was adopted, I don't know, a year and a half ago. And so one of the aims of our strategic plan is to get state school choice in more areas of the state. So I've got a map here of all of our existing state charter schools. Our commission identified, there were a lot of areas in Georgia that don't have school choice. And so these priorities were really a way that we hope we can encourage more school choice in other areas in Georgia. So the priority area this year is, priority areas are locations more than 5 miles from any operational charter school. I have a little asterisk there. When I say 5 miles, I'm talking about direct route, as the crow flies, not driving distance. My next slide will mention a map that we have to help with this, but I just wanted to call that out. So priority areas, we're really looking for petitions that have locations more than 5 miles from any operational charter school. That's what we are going to give a priority to in fiscal year 24, are those petitions that are proposing locations more than 5 miles from an operational charter school. If you propose a location in a priority area, we're going to require you, and you get approved, we're going to require you to locate and serve students in the priority area during your first operational year. Significantly, even though we have these priorities and we're encouraging it, it does not prohibit you from submitting a petition for a location that falls outside of our priority areas. So you're still free to submit a petition for those locations. However, and we'll include this in our petition instructions, to ensure sufficient resources can be allocated to charter growth in areas with limited educational options, the commission may deny charter applications solely based on location. So I just want to throw that out there. That's really what the priority is, saying, is that we're going to prioritize our resources to schools that are located in those priority areas in order to make sure that we can continue kind of progressing towards meeting our strategic plan. My final slide is, we are going to make available a charter school map to kind of help you decide where those priority areas are in Georgia. It also has other very helpful layers in there that you might use to help yourself determine where some areas in Georgia are that could benefit from additional school choice. So we've got like content mastery scores of schools, wait list of other charter schools in the area. So, there might be a charter school in close proximity, but they have a very high wait list. That doesn't change your priority area, but that is something that you could cite in your petition as evidence of a need for school choice in that area. And then also the school age population of residents around the area. So let me just click on this super fast just so you can see what it looks like. I'm not going to spend a long time on here. We're going to have instructions on our website, hopefully by next Monday, that detail exactly how you can use this map. So this is a map. All of the black dots are charter schools in Georgia. All of the blue circles are the 5-mile radius around the school. So our priority areas would be those areas that fall outside of a blue circle. And if you click on the circles, you can see more information about that charter school. If you go up here to maps and tools, we have those other layers that I mentioned about content mastery and waitlist. So you can play around with that and kind of see if you can figure out some more information about your community that you want to serve that might be helpful. Okay, Kristen, we can switch back to the presentation now. I don't know. Okay, so once again, we're going to make this tool available on our website. Hopefully by Monday, there are going to be some pretty detailed instructions that go along with the map to help you navigate it. But if you have any questions about it, feel free to reach out and we will be glad to help clarify. Now, I think I am out of time. So Kristen, I don't know if I have any other questions, but if you just want to go ahead and I'll let you decide for time, whether we have time for questions or if we need to move on.
I have one last one that's probably good for the group, and
Okay.
that is the area out, is the 5-mile for any charter or any charter with the same grade band?
It's for any charter. The definition that our board approved is a priority area is 5 miles from any operational charter school, regardless of grade band.
Perfect. And then there are a few other technical questions about getting the link and things like that, and I will respond to those in the chat.
Okay. That's it. If you guys have any, I know, like, once again, I said up front that that was going to be pretty technical, but feel free to reach out to me with any questions. I want to, make sure that I'm clear and that you guys fully understand all of the technical requirements when it comes to concurrent submission.
Okay, I am going to take it from here, and I am going to try to get us caught up. I want to take about 10 minutes to go over some considerations for those petitioners online that are interested in replicating an existing charter school. We hope to have our website updated with these resources by next week. So anything that I'm saying, this recording, the slides, as well as the policies that I'm going to reference, some of the policies are available on the site, but this recording and the slides will be available next week. So don't feel like you have to feverishly write this down. It will be available to you really, honestly, next week through next petition cycle. So we're not going to take them down anytime soon. All right. So what Aaron just referenced really related specifically to the startup petition process. It also applies to the replication process, but there's a little bit of different procedures for applying to replicate an existing charter school as opposed to startup charter schools. So first, let's just start to make sure everyone is clear. And replication is the creation of a second or subsequent charter school that utilizes the instructional program or academic model of an existing charter school. For purposes of applying to replicate, you either need to be an existing local charter school or an existing state charter school. All of the processes and procedures that Aaron just went through apply equally to replication petitions, including those petition priorities that Aaron just discussed. The timeline for charter replication, please make sure that you hear this loud and clear. There is a letter of intent required in order to submit a replication petition. That letter of intent is due to the SCSC by December 11th, 2023. There is no letter of intent requirement for startup petitions. If you look at our website now, we have already made that letter of intent available. It is through our electronic SM Apply portal. You can go to the Start a School page, replicate an existing charter school, and then click the link to access the letter of intent. The information we're collecting in that letter of intent helps us plan for replication petitions we might receive. So nothing that you put in there is binding. If you need to change your attendance zone or anything like that, you can do that. Just make sure that you get that letter of intent to us by December 11th, 2023. We'll open that petition portal on January 5th. The petition submission deadline for replications is May 3rd. Capacity interviews will begin June 3rd. Recommendations will begin July 26th. For replication petitions, we will be flexible with the interview timelines as well as our review timelines, provided you've met those legal requirements and submission requirements that Erin just went through. All right. The review process, again, we follow our rule as well as the legal standards for reviewing petitions. Again, the difference between this and the startups is the letter of intent. For those local charter schools applying for replication, you will have to receive a written eligibility determination from our staff prior to being able to submit a petition. And I'll talk very quickly about what the accelerated review looks like under our existing petition rule. All right. So the accelerated review process, again, starts with the letter of intent. The scope of that petition is, you know, if for those of you who've been through the startup process, I think there may be like 70 or 80 questions on that application. There are no more than 20 questions on the replication application. There are eligibility standards and requirements that are codified in our replication policy that was just approved by the board. We use that track record, which I'll talk about in just a second, to really form the basis of the readiness of the school to open and replicate a new location. And so that allows us to accelerate that process, is that we rely pretty heavily on the existing track record. The scope and the main things that we dig into in the replication petition process is really governance and operations. So how do you scale your operations to support an existing school? What does your governance structure look like? Do you have the appropriate infrastructure on the ground to facilitate a replication while maintaining the integrity of the model for the existing and replicating schools? So the replication petition really leans into those things. And uses the track record of success to kind of support and scaffold the integrity of the academic program and outcomes. So that is the quick and dirty of that. All right. I mentioned our replication policy. It is already up on our website. Very quickly, for existing state charter schools, after you submit your letter of intent, when you're able to actually submit your petition after that January 5th deadline, what we are looking at to determine whether or not you are actually eligible to submit a petition is whether or not you've met academic standards on our CPF for the 3 most recent consecutive years, and that your performance record demonstrates that the school has met financial and operational CPF standards in 2 of the 3 most recent years, including the most recent years. Again, that's for existing state charter schools. For existing local charter schools, as I mentioned before, you have to apply to our staff, send a written request to me, SCSC General Counsel, seeking an eligibility determination. And essentially what we do is we use the same standard that we use for our existing state charter schools. We just have to use equivalence because you guys are not necessarily evaluated under our CPF. So we calculate the equivalent of how you would likely perform on our CPF based on the 3 most recent years of data. So just keep that in mind. And that is it. All right, quick and dirty. Erin is the point of contact for startup charter schools. Saron Lockett, I am the point of contact for replication charter schools. I know that was very quick. If you have any questions about the replication process, please feel free to reach out to me. Again, we should have our website updated with all of this content by the beginning of next week. Thanks.
All right, and with that, we're going to turn it over to Carmen from our office to talk about funding.
Good morning, everyone. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So basically what you're looking here is about how charter schools are funded. So one of the things I want to talk about in this presentation, we are going to talk about why your budget exists. Do not get focused too much on these details, like how much funding am I going to have exactly, because you're just not going to know right now. So what I want you to focus on is the big picture. As people have iterated what your funding is how your school is going to be operationalized. So basically, what this slide is showing you, anything with an asterisk is revenue that's going to be calculated for you in the budget template. We'll go over the budget template more deeply in a webinar on November 2nd. So just know that the funding for state, which is the QBE, T&E, and the state charter school supplement, are actually calculated for you in the budget template. Anything with kind of like a little hat or a change sign is basically funding that you might receive, but you have to prove that you are going to receive it. So you just can't put in a grant if you don't actually really have it. So you can put that in as long as you can back it up. Also, for your loans and lines of credit, make sure that you have actual terms, either market rates or something that you have looked into seriously. You don't want to just put up made up numbers, because it will come to haunt you in the end. Then also federal funding. Federal funding is not considered in the budget template because it's based on factors that we really can't capture in the budget template, and also it's going to be a smaller source of funding. So really your larger funding sources are going to be your state funding sources of QBE, T&E, which stands for Training and Experience, and the state charter school supplement, which makes up for the local funding that is a state charter school you are not going to have. So the budget template itself, we are actually going to do a deep dive in the budget template, but not today. So the budget template is going to be available in the application portal when it opens on October 30th. Of course, you're welcome to look at it, but just remember, we're going to do a deep dive on November 2nd. And what you want to make sure of with your budget template, again, we're focusing on the why. Why does this budget template exist? Because basically what your petition is going to lead you to is how much your school is going to cost to run. So you want to make sure that any costs that you're going to have that are reflected in your petition are going to show up in the budget template, because the budget template is a business plan. So the budget template, this is just a high-level overview. It's in Excel. You have to use that budget template that's in the portal. Do not try to replicate it. There are a lot of things embedded in there. So, and that's the only budget template we will accept. There's an instructions tab. As you should always do, read your instructions first and thoroughly. Then there are 6 tabs you have to complete: the actual budget, your staffing plan, your cash balances, and your cash flow projections for your planning year, which would be if you are approved, your planning year would be for fiscal year 25, which the state fiscal year starts on July 1, 2024 and ends on June 30th, 2025. It shows your cash flow projection for year 1, which is fiscal year 26, which again would start July 1, 2025 and run through June 30th, 2026. Also, when you do your budget template, you have to do all 6 tabs. If you do not submit your budget templates, and you will be submitting 2, it is grounds for non-acceptance of your entire petition. Also, understand that this budget template is not an operations plan, it is a business plan. It is based on the funding that exists currently, which is not what the future state of your school is going to be. So what you need to understand is your actual budget is going to be very different based on how many actual students you have, where you actually end up being located. So I don't want you to think that the budget template told me I'm going to have X dollars, and then suddenly you're in your planning year and you don't have X dollars. So just keep those things in mind. Also, you're going to have to submit a 100% budget template and one that anticipates 65%. And the 65% budget is reflective of schools that are under-enrolled. And that 65% budget gives us a window into what kind of decisions you as a school would make if you are faced with under-enrollment, which generates revenue. So if you're under enrolled, you're not going to be generating as much revenue as you had anticipated. So we want to see what kind of decisions you're going to make if you're faced with that kind of situation. So remember, you have to submit a 100% budget as well as a 65% budget. So again, your petition plus this budget template makes up your school's business plan. As I said before, this budget template is no guarantee of funding, and that is what this disclaimer is telling you. Then you will have to sign off. It shows fiscal year 20 here. Obviously, you'll be signing off for fiscal year 25, which would be your planning year. Also, it just basically acknowledges different things that are within the budget template. Again, it's basically saying you understand what you're submitting and that you want to make sure also you review everything before you submit it. You can actually view your uploadable files before you actually submit. Once you submit, you're done. You cannot retract your budget template. It's there. So make sure you review before you submit. And again, remember, you're submitting two budgets, 65% and 100%. So revenue. Revenue is basically how much your school is going to bring in. And that is going to be dependent on how many students you have. There are a lot of things that we see over and over. One is overestimating student enrollment. And you do not want to work your enrollment numbers so that your budget works. You want to make sure that you are frank and realistic about what your student enrollment is going to be. And there's a lot of factors that affect your student enrollment, where you're located. Others have spoken about, are you in a saturated market? It's going to be really hard for you to attract students if you're already in a saturated market, which is one of the reasons why we're looking for schools to open outside of areas where they're already established schools. Also, if you're a new school, it's typically difficult attracting teachers. We all know, my son is a teacher. He had many job offers because teachers are at a premium. It is very hard when you are a new school to attract teachers. So you want to be thinking about that as you build your budget. Also, don't give me revenue that you actually don't have. If you have a grant, be prepared to back it up. And that means you're going to submit proof of it in your petition. The second thing is expenses. So with expenses, these are some of the things that we see. The largest part of your budget is going to be your personnel as well as your facilities costs. So what you want to make sure of is that you are not underestimating your personnel costs. In the portal, I have included a salary calculation tool, which has actual estimates for TRS, health insurance, Social Security, Medicare, all those things that a full freight position is going to cost you. There is no requirement for you to use that salary tool, but it's very simple to use. You put in a salary and all those costs are going to calculate for you. So I would suggest that you use that because it really helps to give you a realistic prediction of what your staff is going to be costing you, as well as not just teachers. There are other people that are going to be in that building. You're going to have a principal, you're going to have maybe a head of school. So there's different costs that are going to be associated. And so you don't want to just be focusing on salary. You want to be focusing also on those benefit costs, which can add up. Also, make sure that your facility costs are realistic. Facilities, we know right now real estate is expensive, especially if you're in the metro area. So what you want to be doing is when you're looking at a facility, make sure you're looking at current market rates. You want to make sure that your numbers are based on reality. Also, include costs for renovations. We've all, if you're a homeowner, you buy the house, suddenly the roof is leaking, suddenly you need a new window, suddenly you need a lawnmower. So make sure that you're also including costs for renovations. Also, make sure that instructional costs, you're running a school. There's a lot of things Budgets are made of people and stuff and a place to put it all in, unless you're a virtual school. And so your instructional costs to provide that academic program that you're going to describe in your petition also have to be reflected in that budget template. Also, within the budget template, we include a column for you to add notes. So if you are fortunate enough that you're getting donations of things, let's say like student furniture, make sure that you include that you have donated furniture, and that's why you're not including it as an expense on your budget. Also, amortizing, I can't say that word today, amortizing expenditures inappropriately. And basically what that means is that you say that all your expenses every single month are not going to be the same. And that's just not realistic, particularly when you're talking about a school. So there are certain things, yes, that are going to be the same every year, such as your rent or every month, such as your rent or your salaries. But there are other things that when you get the bill, you have to pay for it. So for example, if you order computers, which most likely you will, when they come in, you're going to pay for them all at once. So that's going to be a hit to your budget. So what you want to see with your cash balances is they're not going to be the same every single month. And you want to make sure that your budget can sustain any larger hits that are going to happen throughout the school year. Testing is also another time period where your costs are going to increase. So again, you want your budget to be reflective of what is happening month to month. The other thing that I want to keep you guys to keep in mind is that if you are approved as a state charter school, you are not just a school. You are considered a school district, which means you have to fulfill all the obligations of a school district. This is just a very small list of all of the things that school districts are required to provide. You have to handle data collections, managing your money, federal programs, special ed, legal compliance, and on and on and on. And one of the things I also want to make sure that you know, charter schools do have flexibility, but when it comes to fiscal compliance, there's actually very little wiggle room because we are handing over to you millions of public dollars. So you want to make sure that when you're running your school financially, you know what you're doing. There are also staffing. As I said before, staffing is going to be a big component of your budget. Now, there are certain things that are required that you have to do so you can operate a successful school. These are some of the positions that you might consider. However, especially if you're a brand new school, you might not be able to hire all these people. Also, another thing that you want to make sure of is that you are using competitive salaries. Some of these people are hard to find, and to say that you're going to pay somebody $32,000 a year without benefits is really probably not a realistic strategy. So again, just like with your facilities, you want to be doing research as to what the salaries are for teachers in your attendance zone, what other salaries are for positions that you're considering to hire. There is also a staffing plan tool within the budget template that will also help you to figure out which positions you are going to absolutely hire in your first years of operation, or what are ones that you can have one person doing multiple functions. Now, the one reason the chief financial officer has an asterisk beside them is there is an actual law, OCGA 160-4-9.05, which actually outlines the requirements for a CFO. Now, some of you are going to maybe hire a service that will handle your back office operations, but if you're actually going to hire a CFO, these are the requirements for the CFO. Now, in your application, you can just put, if you actually have somebody who has said, yes, I'm going to step forward to do this, you would give us their name as well as a resume. Or if you're still going to be in the process, you would just provide what job description you're using to hire this person, as well as describe the hiring process. I know this is hard to see. This is that staffing plan that I was talking about. This is part of your budget template, and it will be required. And what this basically shows you, and when we're doing the budget webinar, we'll go do a deep dive into this. But basically what you're seeing here are the LEA or school district functions. And LEA stands for Local Education Agency. And that's basically a school district. So there are a lot of different functions that LEAs have to perform. So what you're seeing on the left are those functions. What you're seeing to the right are how you're going to staff those positions. We also have specific titles that we will be putting in the budget template to help you link your petition as well as your budget template. So you'll be able to outline who you're going to be hiring, what their salary is. And this will also allow you to see if you have one person who's doing 8 of these functions, you might need to reconsider how that person's job is actually going to be handled. You might need to move some of those functions to somebody else. Then also your budget considerations, also with facilities. This is something that really hampers schools. A lot of times they go in and you have to be reasonable. Also, your facilities, when you're working that 65% budget, remember facilities are it's a fixed cost. So if you have a building or whatever it is you're renting, and you only have 65% of the students that you anticipated actually showing up, your building is not going to magically shrink. And unless you have a very benevolent landlord, they're not going to say, oh yeah, sure, we'll just, we'll cut 35% off your rent. That's not going to happen. So you have to remember that your facilities costs, when you're looking at that 65% budget, are really going to impact the decisions that you have to make when looking at the other costs within your budget. Also, make sure that you include renovation and construction costs. Also, if you are financing your building, make sure that you have realistic loan terms and that they are represented in your budget. The next thing that we want to talk about are there's give and take with transportation. So transportation costs you if you offer it. It also costs you in terms of revenue if you don't offer it, because if you don't offer transportation, that's going to be a barrier to a lot of families and they would not be able to participate. So if you are going to offer transportation, what you want to think of is, how are you going to provide that transportation? Are you going to have transport vans? Well, how much do those cost? You have to hire drivers and so on and so forth. Also, there is a lot of state law and Georgia Department of Education rules that surround transportation. Make sure that you are aware of those rules and that you are following them. Also, are you going to have to charge a transportation fee, or are you going to provide it free for parents? All of those things are things you have to consider when you're looking at your budget. Of course, you can choose the easy option. Hey, I'm not going to provide transportation. But again, that's going to cost you because you're going to have fewer families who are going to be able to get to your school. So if you are not going to be offering transportation, then you have to think of other ways that you could mitigate that. Are you going to provide MARTA passes? But though if you're outside the metro area, that might not necessarily be an option. Are you going to rely on parents providing transportation? So again, transportation is going to cost you one way or the other. If you don't offer it, it's going to cost you. And if you do offer it, it's going to cost you. So you want to make that decision right away and then plan out how you're going to handle that option. The next thing is nutrition. How are you going to meet your students' nutritional needs? Now, the school nutrition program is something obviously that you can offer to your schools. One of the things that we want you to keep in mind is that the school nutrition program has very specific requirements and an application process that will definitely take you longer than you think it's going to. Also, the school reimbursement program for lunch and breakfast and other things that the school nutrition program provides do not actually cover all the costs of providing those things. So you need to keep that in mind. So again, just like transportation, you could decide, nah, we're not going to do that. But the problem is, what are you going to do when your kids start coming in and they actually don't have any food with them, or that you chose a vendor that they can't afford? So that's going to be a cost, because again, if you don't provide it, that's a barrier for enrollment. If you do provide it, yes, you're going to have more students enrolled, and you have to make sure that you can manage offering that program, and that if you are going to offer it, that you have realistic timelines as to when that program is going to be able to start. Then the final is your enrollment plan. I cannot emphasize this enough. Do not work your enrollment to make your budget numbers work. Again, your budget plan works with your petition. When I'm looking at a petition, I want to see that those costs are reflected in the budget, because the two go hand in hand, because your petition and your budget template are your business plan. So remember, enrollment, the number of butts or cheeks in seats is how much it's going to affect your revenue. That state funding that I talked about at the very beginning of this presentation. So remember, you want to make sure that you are not in a saturated area, because if you're in a saturated area, parents already have choices. They have other charter schools, they have public schools to choose from. So it's going to be harder for you to kind of make inroads in that kind of market. Whereas if you're in an area that either has very few or no charter schools, you are going to be a more attractive option, because you're the new kid in town, and you're offering something new and something different. So what you want to make sure of is, when you're looking at enrollment, that you have a comprehensive recruitment plan. People just showing up and saying, hey, I like your school and I think I'm going to come, is not going to cut it. A lot of our schools use customer relationship management tools, also called CRM. Those are some things you can do in-house. Also, so you want to make sure that you are not only attracting attention, but that you are attracting families who are actually going to show up. And you would be amazed, there are first day no-shows are a complete reality. I've seen it, it is shocking. And you want to make sure that you have an enrollment plan that's going to take those two into consideration. The other thing is that when you get your first funding allotment of QBE, the Quality-Based Education Program, it is based on projected numbers, because we don't know how many kids are actually going to attend your school. But then in October, there's an actual physical student count that happens that you will do. And what happens is, now we have a true up. Now we have an actual number based on reality. And guess what? Your QBE is going to be trued up based on that reality. So if you have numbers way lower than what you projected, your state funding pretty quickly is going to be adjusted. If you are a first-year school, we will go into this in more detail, but I just want you to think about these things when you're building your petition, looking realistically at how many kids you're going to be able to attract to your school. So that was kind of quick. And like I said, we are going to do a deep dive in the budget template on our webinar on November 2nd. We will be going through that in detail. I'll also be offering some tips and tricks. So if there are any questions, I can't see them in the chat. So with no questions, okay, so I am done. And we're good. Thank you very much for your attention.
Perfect. Well, as promised, we're going to take a quick break here to let everyone run to the restroom, grab a cup of coffee, whatever you might need. So if everyone will plan to be back around 10:55, and we'll get started back up then.
For state charter schools, because state charter schools are LEAs. I'm Tiffany Leach, Associate General Counsel here at the SCSC, and I'll be providing you with an overview of the legal obligations that petitioners should be aware of as you start the process, because you want to be aware of your legal obligations and also in your petition be able to describe a plan for implementation as well as governing board oversight of these obligations. So we'll start with the general legal overview. We'll go into some federal obligations, state obligations, and then close out with assessments, accountability, and data collections and reporting, which Carmen did touch on with regards to some of the fiscal responsibilities. So posted for you now is the state statute that says that state charter schools are local education agencies. And the best way to think about that is that an LEA is synonymous with a school system or school district. So if any prospective petitioners have worked in traditional public schools, you've been with a county board of education or a city schools and school districts. And so as a standalone state charter school, Official Code of Georgia 22-2090 says for administrative purposes, including your data reporting, student enrollment, counting procedures, student achievement, funding allocations, all of those administrative responsibilities as defined by the State Board of Education, the state charter school does operate as a local education agency. So you should just keep that in mind as you are developing your petition. And so here for you is a slide that shows you the difference between a locally approved charter school and a state charter school. Locally approved schools, which was touched on a little bit earlier, they are authorized by a local board of education, which is typically assigned to a particular county or city school. The local board of education is the LEA for the charter school, and the local district manages the LEA responsibilities, which include reporting obligations, policy development and implementation, funding, special education services, English language learner services, gifted services, your human resources, and employer obligations. A lot of those responsibilities are managed by the local district when you are a local charter school. In contrast, a state charter school operating as their own LEA will be responsible for all LEA responsibilities and are responsible for ensuring your awareness and compliance of all applicable legal, regulatory, and contractual obligations. So the key word here is all. And so what you want to do is have a plan as you are developing your petition as to which staff is going to be responsible for the responsibilities. How is that going to be, how is the board going to oversee it? How are the relevant staff members going to get the proper training? How, what legal counsel will you consult? You will, as a state charter school, need to have your independent legal counsel. You will need to remain cognizant of developments and changes in the law. And so these are all things that you want to consider as you are developing your petition. It is encouraged that you not just sort of copy the legal obligation, but you actually explain how you've thought through a plan for being able to comply and oversee compliance. So the maximum flexibility, Aaron touched on that earlier in the overview process. In exchange for the maximum flexibility, there are some legal obligations that state charter schools cannot waive. So in the General Education Code in the state of Georgia, which is Title 20, all of the education code may not apply to a state charter school. However, any specific statutes, rules, regulations that say they apply to state charter schools must follow those, as well as any federal, state, local rules, regulations, court orders, and statutes that relate to certain areas that we're going to cover today, which include, there is no waiving civil rights, insurance, the protection of physical health and safety of school students, employees, and visitors, conflict of interest transactions, preventing unlawful conduct, including unlawful conduct near a public school, legally required financial audits, the single statewide accountability system requirements, and student data and financial reporting. State charter schools cannot waive those areas, and some additional areas that cannot be waived include your teacher and leader performance evaluations, which is the TEKS and LEAKS, Teacher and Leader Keys Effectiveness System, the state adopted assessments for end of course, end of grade assessments, Georgia milestones, fingerprinting and criminal background checks that are required, clearance certificates that are required for staff, teachers, and personnel at school, individual graduation plans, and early intervention programs. Those are just the categories of state laws that would apply to state charter schools. So now we're going to move into your federal legal obligations. In this area, we will cover some of the constitutional rights, civil rights statutes, privacy and student records, and federal education requirements. This is not an exhaustive list of all of your federal legal obligations, but these are some of the primary areas of law that directly impact public schools. So when we talk about constitutional considerations, schools must remain cognizant of the principles imparted by the U.S. Constitution. Here we have freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, and due process. Constitutional law does develop over time through Supreme Court rulings. So charter schools need to think about ways to stay aware of those legal developments. And also with due process, be mindful in settings relating to schools when there's long-term suspensions and things of that nature, the proper notice and opportunity to be heard, having tribunal hearings and things of that nature. All of that is encompassed by constitutional considerations. Next, we're going to look at some of the federal civil rights statutes that apply to students, but these statutes in most instances also apply to your obligations as an employer. As a state charter school, you will be employing staff, and so these civil rights statutes will apply to any of the school's programs, activities, admissions, employment, any actions that the school takes. It must always be aware of the civil rights statutes and their implications. So first we have the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VI, which generally prohibits discrimination in all areas, basis of race, color, national origin. And again, this is in all programs and activities conducted by the school. The American with Disabilities Act in Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities. State charter schools must ensure that individuals with disabilities have equal access to the school's programs and activities. And the American with Disabilities Act also requires that your facilities and websites that you utilize meet certain accessibility requirements. So this goes along with identifying your facilities, making sure that your facility is accessible to all stakeholders, all the way through your education programs and any specialized needs that a student may have. Title IX of the Education Amendments prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, including ensuring equity in your athletic programs, and the Age Discrimination Act prohibits discrimination on the basis of age. The key here is to remember all of your civil rights obligations as it relates to all programs, activities, admissions, and employment. And again, as you are developing your petition, you are keeping in mind how your school program is going to adhere to these laws, ensure compliance, ensure proper training, and oversight. The IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. Here, you want to keep in mind that as a state charter school, you are a public school. You are obligated to provide a free and appropriate public education. Again, awareness development of a plan. You do not want in your petition just to say we're going to provide a free and appropriate public education. You want to actually be able to explain throughout the process how you're going to do that, regardless of the need that a student may present. If the services needed by a student are not traditionally provided by the school, the state charter school cannot turn away that student with a disability. You have to have a plan for how you are going to meet that student's specific needs to ensure that every child receives an appropriate education. Under Child Find, LEAs must conduct activities to identify, locate, and evaluate children who are suspected of having disabilities. Under the evaluation and placement criteria for least restricted environment, every child attending a state charter school must have a complete evaluation prior to receiving special education services, and a state charter school must obtain parent consent in writing before conducting an evaluation. A parent, teacher, or other school official may request that a child be evaluated for special education services. So as you are developing your petition and describing how you are going to adhere to your special education responsibilities, you want to think about, from a staffing perspective, who is going to be developing IEPs, doing the evaluations, checking for compliance in those areas, as well as making sure that the school is providing the appropriate procedural safeguards to parents with certain rights, such as we talked about some of the due process rights, like written notice, an opportunity to have a hearing, evaluation, placement of a child, including parents in that process, developing the individualized education program, the IEP, as well as discipline. So there's overall discipline and codes of conduct that you will be required to have for your school, but then the discipline guidelines change when it pertains to discipline of a special education student. So discipline students with disabilities in accordance with the requirements of IDEA. You need to have a student-centered process that includes certain safeguards to ensure that students are receiving the appropriate services throughout the disciplinary process. The next federal law that you should be aware of is the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. This act prohibits segregation and requires comparable services for homeless youth. You would need to identify a local homeless liaison at your school who would be responsible for ensuring these services, counseling families, providing notice to your school community about the rights under McKinney-Vento. There are certain enrollment exceptions made if a homeless youth does not have the necessary registration records and documents. They still need to be admitted pending those, and there also needs to be transportation provided for that student. So all of these things, again, should be considered as you are planning and developing your school, your petition, as well as Carmen talked about some of the fiscal responsibilities, because you would have to carry out these legal obligations and there are associated costs with providing these services. Next, we have federal laws that relate to the privacy and confidentiality of student information and records, the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, and the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment. You want to be aware as you are planning your obligation to keep student records private and confidential, the appropriate training needed for staff that deal with records throughout the school process, your enrollment process, enrollment records, your special education records, how and where they will be housed, who will have access, and the rights of parents to consent to disclosing some information in certain situations. All of these are, again, privacy and confidential laws that schools should be aware of their obligations in this area as an LEA. Now we're going to go into some state legal obligations. First is your open enrollment. Charter schools must allow attendance from all students residing within the attendance zone that's specified in the school's charter. There can be no improper restrictions on enrollment, even if the state charter school's instructional program is geared toward a student population, such as at-risk students, students with disabilities, or English learners. All students must have access to apply and be enrolled. And enrollment priorities and opportunities. State charter schools can have enrollment priorities, but again, those priorities would be assigned after the opportunity to enroll applies to everyone. A state charter school must make its enrollment information available to the public throughout the year. That is usually done by request if someone contacts the school, but also on your website. State charter school must provide the public at least 2 weeks notice prior to conducting an enrollment opportunity or having to have a lottery. Enrollment preferences allowed by state law may disqualify a state charter school from being eligible for grant funding through the federal charter school program. That is just something to note. If you're utilizing enrollment preferences, you want to look into any grant opportunities and make sure that they are aligned with your enrollment procedures. Lottery procedures. When the number of applicants exceeds the capacity of the program, class, grade, level, or building of the state charter school, the state charter school must conduct an admission lottery that is a random selection process to ensure that all applicants that do not have an enrollment preference have an equal chance of being admitted. Those lottery procedures must also be available to the public. Tuition and fees. A state charter school may not charge tuition or fees to a student residing within the attendance zone specified in the school's charter. A state charter school may not require its students to provide materials or equipment to participate in the educational program, and all required textbooks and other reading materials for students enrolled in the school must be provided to the students free of charge. State law also requires that teachers and school personnel have clearance certificates and background checks, certification waivers, and requirements. So there is flexibility in the certification that a state charter school may require, but whatever the personnel qualifications and waivers are, those must be readily available. There must be a plan saying what types of certifications you will be waiving, but there are certain areas where you cannot waive certification as it relates to special education. Employee evaluations, school leader evaluations using the state system, the TEKS and LEAKS assessments, participating in the teachers retirement system of Georgia. And we talked about some of the federal employment obligations. In addition to the civil rights obligations in federal employment, there's also the Family Medical Leave Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act. Your annual operating budget, there are legal requirements for adopting that budget. There must be public hearings as a part of your governance board meetings to give the public an opportunity to provide comment and discussion on the school's operating budget. A posting of the budget must be on the state charter school's website to ensure website transparency and transparency in your operations. Notice of your budget hearings must also be published in the legal organ or newspaper of general circulation for your area, location, attendance zone, so that the public can attend and have an opportunity to provide comment. So that would include the location, time, and place of those state required operating budget hearings. Some additional state obligations that as an LEA, state charter schools should be aware of include student discipline, your code of conduct and bullying policies, health and safety, legal obligations such as the school health nurse program, infectious disease policies, caring of students that have diabetes. And there are facilities requirements that are required by the Georgia Department of Education and certain timelines for your facilities to get all of the necessary codes and certificates. We have one more section. Do we have any questions? Okay, I will pause right now.
Let's see. The first question, is it appropriate to have transportation for all student categories if that is possible regardless of demographics? All categories being transported together.
Categories, I'm presuming you mean like special education students or students with some particular specialized needs, transportation on the bus. If you could just add some clarity there. But if I understand your question appropriately, your students can be transported together, but then if there's any specialized needs that are a part of an individualized education plan, like a student's IEP, you would make those accommodations as needed. And then whether or not you'll provide transportation, that will be a decision for the school to make. But if you provide it, then there are legal obligations that go with the transportation. Okay, and we had one more. No, okay, thank you for that. Okay, so assessment, accountability, and data collections and reporting. These are additional state LEA responsibilities. And for purposes of this review and prospective petitioners, again, you want to be thinking about staffing for these responsibilities and oversight and compliance. State charter schools must participate in and be evaluated by the single statewide accountability system. In Georgia, schools are assessed on a variety of indicators, and those indicators comprise the College and Career Ready Performance Index, goes by CCRPI. And so anything that is required in terms of assessment, student assessments, certain surveys or evaluations that you need to respond to, all of those various indicators are comprised in the CCRPI. So the data that needs to be reported to the Georgia Department of Education, as an LEA, you want to ensure that you have systems in place to ensure that those reports are being made and that they are timely made. Assessments. Georgia student assessments are the foundation of the single statewide accountability system. So the CCRPI score, part of those indicators come from student performance on state assessments. State charter schools want to ensure that they understand which assessments are given in the state of Georgia. All students must be present. All students that are present must be tested. And there are certain required grade level appropriate assessments. For instance, in kindergarten, there's the Georgia Kindergarten Inventory of Developing Skills, the Georgia Milestones, which apply in certain grade levels. And then there's the Georgia Milestones has a end of course assessments on the high school level, the Georgia alternative assessments, and the testing personnel certification requirements. So you'll need like a testing coordinator or someone designated at the school who goes through the training and the protocols for statewide testing. The school will need to consider their technology and equipment. The tests are given online. All accommodations are met, that you have the monitors and proctors needed for the testing sessions, as well as students who have certain testing accommodations in their IEPs. And that you are doing the test in the appropriate testing window on time, because the reports and the actual scores will come back, and that'll be something that is factored into the school's overall CCRPI. So you have to test within the window that the test is open. Data collections and reporting. State charter schools must use the criteria and definitions of the Quality Basic Education Funding, the QBE funding that Carmen mentioned earlier, and the FTE, full-time equivalent reporting process to calculate the amount of state funding to which the state charter school is entitled. So state charter schools must follow all aspects of the FTE reporting. The reporting is critical to your funding. So there are trainings available. You want to make sure that required staff have that training and understand how to perform the reporting, that the reporting is done timely and correctly, as it will impact the funding that the school receives. And then Godot data reporting. Some areas that state charter schools will be required to report on, generally in every October. Godot uses the certified classified personnel information data collection to collect various data regarding the personnel employed by the school. That's the CPI. There's also the pre-ID labels through its data collection process. The Georgia Department of Education requires LEAs to submit student level data to be used to create identification labels for state assessments. Student records. The student record data collection is the most comprehensive data collection conducted by Godot. The student record data collection usually begins in February, and initial uploads must be completed by the end of April. Student record data collections consist of multiple levels of files, and a state charter school must complete all files. Student record data collection is used to monitor, enforce, and report compliance with a variety of state and federal laws. So some of the laws that we talked about earlier, when you report your student record data information, it would be like your students that are Section 504 plans, or for QBE funding requirements, or IDEA. So again, compliance with the law as well as timely reporting will all impact the operations of the school and the LEA. So finally, we just want to close out making sure that you understand the difference between a locally approved and state charter school. As a state charter school, you are operating as an LEA. As you are developing your petition, you want to ensure that you are vetting each aspect of your plan for legal compliance, and that you understand that you have school district responsibilities as well as school level traditional responsibilities. Ensure that you are familiar with all applicable legal and regulatory requirements. And if you have a program or practice included in your petition and you do not know how that program or practice works, you want to make sure that you consult all available resources, the SCSC website, the Godot website, any trainings that you can attend, consultants, legal counsel that you can consult with to make sure your understanding is accurate, and that your governing board is aware of their responsibility to oversee the school's compliance in all areas. So I will pause now for any final questions. Okay, seeing none at this time, that concludes my presentation. And we're going to break for lunch. I think we were able to make up some time here. And so you need to be back at 12:15, everyone, 12:15. This is your lunch break. Thank you.
Council here at the State Charter Schools Commission. And this segment of the boot camp is going to really focus on the governing board and what those obligations are from a legal standpoint, and a little bit of what we like to see and what we're looking for in the petitions process. I'll plug, as everyone has already, that we do have an orientation that's going to go in detail on tips and tricks. With respect to the scope of this presentation, what we'll be focusing on is how to demonstrate that your governing board has the experience and capacity necessary to oversee a charter school LEA. So let's jump right in. I will move efficiently in hopes to maybe get us out of here a little bit early. So what we're going to talk about is I'll give you some definitions for governing board, some SCSC expectations that are codified in our rules and our charters. We'll go over fiduciary duties, so expectations for basically how you implement your role as a board member, conflict of interest provisions in law, and then we'll close with just a little tidbit to tease the orientation content on experience and capacity. All right, so let's start with what is a governing board. I'm an attorney, so I always go directly to the law. These are the standards that we use when we are looking at petitions, so we want to make sure that you're aware of what some of these obligations are. The law defines a governing board as the nonprofit organization that applies to the SCSC to operate a charter school. It's the same governing board that is involved in school level governance of the state charter school, and you'll see those legal citations at the bottom there if you want to cross-reference some of these definitions. So governance is kind of this very broad term. School level governance, however, is a specific term that's defined in law that basically defines the scope of a governing board's oversight for a state charter school. And that is decision-making authority in personnel decisions, financial decisions, curriculum and instruction, resource allocation, establishing and monitoring the achievement of school improvement goals, and school operations. Most of what we're looking at, both in the petition and as we ask questions in that capacity interview, is your ability as governing board members to uphold school level governance and your understanding of the concept, including all of these specific areas. If you ultimately are approved for a charter, you will see some of this same language codified in your charter contract. It is also elsewhere codified in a state board rule. So no question about the scope of the authority here and where the oversight lies for the governing board. Some general oversight obligations, most of these were touched on earlier. I always just like to kind of include those. They are in rule. So you have an obligation as an employer. Specifically, the board is required to employ teachers and other instructional staff and faculty. The board can retain the authority to select, dismiss, and evaluate a school leader, even if that school leader is employed by an education service provider or other vendor. You need to have at least 2 governing board members that are trained to administer the state required evaluation instrument. You cannot delegate this oversight obligation. You should be adopting policies, for example, criminal records checks policies, requiring clearance certifications, ensuring that you have professional qualifications for your teachers and staff to fill in those gaps where you are waiving some of the state certifications. State charter schools are required to participate in the teachers retirement system of Georgia and to use the performance evaluation system adopted by the Board of Education when evaluating both teachers and the school leader. So those are just some specific LEA oversight obligations that occur at the board level. You've got to remain responsible and accountable for all operations, compliance, and performance, particularly of those that you use, those that are performed by contractors or other vendors. So even though you may contract with for-profit or other entities for certain services for the school, the board at all times will remain responsible and accountable for the oversight in those areas. You've got to ensure that pre-opening benchmarks are met, especially if you are on the founding board. A little bit later, we'll touch briefly on the difference between a founding board and a governing board, and what the school's needs may be in each of those situations. The board has to ensure compliance with Georgia Open Records Act, Open Meetings Act, as well as regulatory transparency requirements that are codified in state board and SCSC rules. There are annual governance training requirements, and you're required to adopt a conflict of interest policy, both that applies to the board as well as to the school, and to make sure that anytime the SCSC requests that you have documentation showing that your board members have read and agreed to adhere to that conflicts of interest policy. The other thing that I think falls off the table sometimes is, as I mentioned, kind of going back to the definition of governing board, it has to be a nonprofit organization. So the governing board of the nonprofit organization, you have to ensure the legal compliance with the nonprofit law. It was just revised, so I would recommend getting with counsel, making sure that your bylaws, your articles of incorporation, and other documents adhere to some of those updates. So definitely make sure you're cross-checking for petitioners that are coming back a second time to ensure that if you've got any blank spaces in those bylaws, those are going to be filled in by legal requirements that are in law. And if that's the case, you want to come to the table with a governing board that is fully compliant, both with the Georgia nonprofit law, your articles of incorporation, as well as your governing board bylaws. Contract expectations. What you will see if you are awarded a charter contract is that, again, additional kind of oversight obligations. As a governing board, you're setting the mission and vision of the school. You're adopting those board policies. You're not doing the day-to-day implementation, but you're setting the standard through policies and processes that should be implemented by your school leader and below other staff. You're ensuring legal compliance, regulatory compliance, and specifically compliance with the charter contract. If you have not done so already, I would highly recommend that you visit our website and take a look at our charter contract so you know what some of those contractual obligations are. I think oftentimes many folks see the rules, they see the regulations, they're generally familiar with the landscape, but they don't know the terms and conditions. They don't know what they just signed. As a governing board, it's your responsibility to know what you just signed and also make sure that the charter school is in compliance with the terms and conditions of that charter. You're also responsible for strategic planning, so understanding the long and short term goals of the school, making sure that you're codifying those in a very clear vision that can be executed by your selected school leader. You're responsible for the allocation of resources, including the financial viability of the charter school. For those of you that are planning to partner with education service providers or other vendors, regardless of who you partner with to facilitate the education program, you have got to remain autonomous in the way that you execute your duties. That means ensuring that contracts and other agreements that you execute with vendors don't unnecessarily or illegally erode your autonomy and your obligations to act in an oversight capacity over the school. Our charter contracts require that you maintain substantive control of school operations, finance, and accountability, that you continue to monitor school improvement goals, that you ensure that there are clear avenues for stakeholder communication, and that you have a process in place to immediately respond to stakeholder complaints, grievances, or concerns, as well as that there's a process in place for timely reporting to the SCSC and other governmental entities that might have enforcement authority over the school. And then again, as I mentioned before, you'll see that school leader oversight echoed in the charter contract, just as it is in law and applicable rules. I mentioned again ESP and vendor agreements. One thing that we do both in the startup petition process as well as the replication process is any school that plans to partner with an education service provider, meaning basically an education entity. It could be for-profit or nonprofit that offers a suite of services that could include curriculum and instruction, back office, financial, governance, CFO, those types of supports. That is what an educational service provider does. So if you're a nonprofit governing board, but you are contracting with a for-profit or other management company to manage the broad scope of day-to-day school operations, you need to make sure that any agreements that you have with that entity comply with your oversight obligations as a board. We take a role in this as well. So as the SCSC, when you're in the petition process, we'll vet and ask you questions about your ESP agreement. Our executive director must approve the terms of that ESP agreement before we will make a recommendation to the board to approve your charter contract. If for some reason that doesn't happen, ultimately we will not, the board chair, our SCSC chair, will not sign the charter contract and enter into a charter until we have approval of that ESP agreement. What we want to see and what our charter petition seeks is that you've done some due diligence to ensure that the ESP is an appropriate partner. And that kind of goes to your fiduciary duties, really to make sure that the decisions that you're making on behalf of the school are in fact in the best interest of the school and not some third party. The agreements must reflect on their face the obligation to oversee school operations, including vendors. We've got to be able to see in those ESP agreements that the board is the employer for certain staff, specifically teachers and other instructional staff. And if you do have a school leader that is employed by a vendor or education service provider, we need to see in that ESP agreement that the board retains at all times the right to select that individual, evaluate that individual, and dismiss that individual. Excuse me. We also want to ensure that any contracts or arrangements that you have with ESPs and vendors show that you have the final say and the final authority on the school's finances, its operations, its academics, and curriculum. So we are looking for for provisions in those agreements that circumvent the board's authority or improperly delegate that authority and that obligation to the vendor, the ESP, or another third party. All right, I mentioned fiduciary duties, so we're going to walk through those really quick. As a governing board of a charter school, you have fiduciary duties to your school community. The fiduciary duties are generally the duty of care, loyalty, and obedience. Each member of the board must independently exercise their judgment with respect to the school. So starting here with the duty of care. Essentially, the duty of care means acting in good faith, using reasonable diligence, care, and skill in executing duties, acting in the best interest of the school. It generally requires officers or directors to carry out their responsibilities in a reasonable manner, in a way that is reasonable under similar circumstances. And obviously in the best interest of the school. What this could look like and what we want to kind of see in the petition as well as in the capacity interview is that there's a plan to actively participate in board meetings, reviewing materials, being prepared to engage in discussion in board meetings, evaluating reports. So as I mentioned, you oversee school accountability. So if we're asking you about how you plan to monitor the academic success of the school, we would hope to see a plan for what data you would want to review, how frequently, who's reporting it to you, and what potentially you would do if the data does not reflect the overall goals for the school. So those are just a couple of examples of how to demonstrate the duty of care. Next is the duty of loyalty. very generally, to avoid conflicts of interest. Essentially, your loyalty is to the school and not to any other entity or third party. You need to be acting in the best interest of school and vetting agreements or partnerships with the school through the lens of what is best for our school community, what supports our mission, our vision, and our strategic plan for the school. So you can't act out of expedience or self-interest. You need to make sure that you're always promoting the purpose of the organization as a school. Anytime there are conflicts of interest, those need to be closely scrutinized, and you need to have a process for evaluating, vetting any potential conflict of interest to ensure that, again, ultimately the best interest of the school is given the most weight. And lastly, the duty of obedience, to act in furtherance of the school's purposes and in compliance with the law, devote the sufficient time to govern appropriately. This is similar to what I said before, is understanding what's in the contract, understanding the legal obligations that you have both as a board as well as the school's obligations as an LEA, making sure you have processes in place to ensure obedience or compliance. So very similar to kind of what we've discussed. What we would want to be able to see is that you're aware of applicable legal obligations, regulatory provisions, and are able to actually oversee the school in a way that is consistent with those obligations. With respect to conflicts of interest, so very similar, just want you all to be aware that there is a conflict of interest statute that's specific to state charter school governing boards. It's codified at OCGA 20-2-2084. Generally, it says the governing board members must not act in their official capacities in matters where they have a material financial interest that would be expected to impair their objectivity. That goes for governing board members or their family members. Solicit or accept gifts where they know the gift was intended to influence their execution of their official duties, and use their position or information that's uniquely known to them by virtue of their position for purposes of securing financial gain. So this goes back very much to the duty of loyalty, ensuring the best interest of the school is always at stake. Make sure you're aware of that provision, you're prepared to comply with it, and that when you're vetting those vendor agreements and other partnerships, that they also avoid conflicts of interest, and that there's like an appropriate vetting process to ensure that any decisions or any agreements made on behalf of the school are made with the school's best interests in mind. Okay. That should have sounded like a whole lot to you. So going on composition and recruitment, one of the things we like to ask when we're in the interview portion of the petition process is like, how much time are folks kind of devoting to this? So we'll go into that in just a minute. There are some general requirements for board members. They have to be U.S. citizens, Georgia residents. They cannot be employed by the state charter schools, cannot be officers, or serve in the board of directors of organizations that sell goods or services to the charter school, and they can't be officers, members, or employees of a local board of education or an employee of a local school system for which the charter school kind of serves, so within that attendance zone. These are kind of the basic legal requirements. You'll also find in our contract, we have requirements that board members must be volunteers. So they cannot be paid beyond like the reasonable expenses for attending board meetings and things of that nature. So make sure that you're keeping those general provisions in mind. Again, when we're looking at petitions for legal compliance, substantive compliance, and when we're in the interview, we'll be making sure that these standards appear to be clear. That you all understand them, and that like your policies and practices and your plan for operations are in compliance with those. The other thing I'll mention again is just we ask about the time commitment. We ask about how much time was invested in creating the petition, understanding the mission, how much time board members expect to spend in the pre-planning phase as the founding board versus in the governance phase as the school transitions into operations. There are lots of obligations, there are lots of moving pieces, and governing board members are volunteers. So we like to make sure that folks know what they're getting into as it relates to basically observing the duties and obligations as governing board members. The other thing you'll want to plan for, and this will go into a lot more during orientation, is we want to see that you are, again, forward thinking. So this goes kind of into the strategic planning element. Do you have a succession plan for your board? Are there term limits? Does everyone who's on the founding board roll off at the same time? And now you have a brand new board with no kind of institutional knowledge kind of taking on the school at one time. Have you planned for that? Have you thought about the needs of the charter school from a founding board's perspective as separate from an operational board's perspective? And does the board composition and succession plan kind of appreciate those different needs depending on the stage of the process the school is in? We are always going to ask about if you have a founding member, so a founding school leader who is kind of leading the charge as the governing board chair from a founding perspective, what will that person's role be when the school becomes operational? Do you have an infrastructure for how you might transition from kind of a peer-to-peer relationship with the school founder to a employer-employee relationship in the context of an operational school? So just thinking about those things, making sure that you're keeping the legal requirements and regulatory obligations in play as you're planning that out is something we'll want to see demonstrated both in your petition and as you articulate your plan in the capacity interview. I've breezed through that relatively quickly, but that pretty much covers it. I'll again just say some of the tips and tricks, kind of the common pitfalls we're going to really dig into in that petitioner orientation. So please make sure that you attend that. That's going to be like your last shot to kind of clean up the last little pieces, close loose ends, understand what we're looking for in the interview. You do not want to miss it. Please make sure that you're keeping an eye out for those obligations, that you complete it, and that you get a certificate of completion. Again, I am Sarone Lockett. I am the one you should reach out to if you are replicating or planning to replicate an existing charter school. Please feel welcome to reach out to Erin Wright, who is our Deputy General Counsel. She will answer any questions you may have if you are planning to apply for a startup charter school. I will toss it to Kristen, and I hope everyone enjoys their afternoon.
Thanks, Sarone. All right, well, with that, we're going to transition over into pre-opening expectations. So the goal of this portion of the presentation is to just make sure that you're clear about what we're going to be looking for during the petitioning phase to demonstrate that you are ready for pre-opening. And I know that sometimes that seems like it's putting the cart before the horse, but the pre-opening process itself is a huge undertaking, and the schools typically, based on the timeline, only have about a year to do so. And so there's a lot of pre-work that needs to go on during the petitioning phase to be able to be prepared to actually start working on pre-opening items right as soon as the school is approved. I'll skip over the mission and vision stuff. You've heard that already today, but just a quick presentation overview. So these are going to be some of the common areas that you'll want to be prepared to discuss in both your petition and capacity interview in terms of pre-opening readiness. The first is going to be facilities. So we'll spend some time about what that looks like, community engagement and enrollment and how that plays into your budget. Again, funding and other financial support that you might need in order to get the school off the ground. And then the pre-opening team's capacity to actually launch a school. All right, so getting started. The facilities. So we're going to spend a little time on this. This is usually one that is asked about often during the capacity interview. There's a section on facilities in the petition itself. So kind of to start this, every petitioning group should have a facility plan or timeline. That should be something that has been reviewed, and if your board does formal approvals for something like that, formally approved by the board. It should also be something that the board broadly is aware of. You can expect to have a question about this. You should be prepared to respond to that facility plan more broadly. The timeline should include major events and compliance deadlines. And so what kind of compliance deadlines what might we be talking about? The first major one is going to be petitioning or facilities requirements that are found in the SCSC's pre-opening checklist. So a school who is recently approved will be going through our FY24 pre-opening checklist, but that is also posted on our website. Schools that are petitioning in this next cycle should reference that FY24 checklist to be able to say, this is what schools are working on now. This is reasonably the timeline and expectations that I can expect to have to meet the following year if approved. The second is you should reference the Godot website. So the Georgia Department of Education has a facility services unit, and they have a number of requirements for school facilities. And it's things that you might not necessarily think about for something like commercial real estate or another type of development project. So things like proximity to a railroad or an airport, proximity to a gas station or a laundromat or dry cleaner can be a tricky one. Proximity to places that serve or sell alcohol. There are just a number of very specific requirements for Georgia public schools. And so you're just going to want to be prepared to make sure that any location that you are scouting for your school would also be compliant with these types of requirements, both on the SCSC's pre-opening side and the Godot facility requirements. So as I highlighted, petitioning groups should have already begun working to identify a facility at the time of petition submission. You should be prepared to speak to those plans during the capacity interview. A high quality petition would include things like an address and be able to say this is our primary facility option, this is our backup facility option, and this is the due diligence that we've already done in identifying that for the purposes of this petition. The facility selection process can be very time consuming. And so if you just say we plan to do these things during the year following our approval, we're going to have lots of questions about your ability to get that work done, get the actual work done on the building and prepare everything else for the pre-opening process. So just something to consider in terms of the timeline while you're working on your application. The next piece to consider with facilities is the where. So the location of your facility, obviously kind of thinking through whether you are going to be a priority designation. If you're applying for that, that should align in your facility selections. What are going to be the location of your main and any alternate facility sites that you have identified in the petition, again, including those addresses. And then does the proposed site match the school's mission and proposed academic plan? So for example, if a school is planning to provide gardening as like a key feature of their school, and it's in an industrial park with no green space, and you have no plans to include green space as a part of your renovation, you might just have some questions about that. So you want to make sure that your facilities plan matches your academic model and programming as well. Can the proposed site accommodate your projected enrollment? So if you are going to tell us you have 700 students coming on day one, and you have a tiny school with 5 classrooms and no plan to add to that site, we're going to have some questions. So again, just be thinking about making sure that the facility itself aligns with your projected enrollment. And if not, if the school can if the facility site can only hold the school for a couple of years, what is the school's long-term facility plan? Has it already begun working on that? Does it have build-out options, that sort of thing? And then again, to kind of highlight back to the Godot facility requirements, would any of your potential sites be excluded from consideration due to potentially being non-compliant with state or local laws? So again, just becoming very familiar with those Godot facility requirements and making sure that you are not proposing locations right off the bat that a quick Google search would tell us are a no-go. So a little bit about the how. So for facilities, things that you're going to want to consider are how will the school acquire the facility for whether it's a lease or a purchase option. In the event that there is some council out there willing to donate a facility to you, That is lovely. That has happened before, but it is absolutely rare. And so just be prepared to submit additional supporting documentation to support a facility donation as a part of your budget and facility plan. Will the facility require any constructions or renovation? So again, are those costs appropriately considered in your budget? Carmen talked about that a little bit this morning, about making sure that your construction and build out fees are included in your year zero budget plan. Will the school use a lender or some sort of financing to finance the facility? If the school is planning on doing that, perfectly acceptable, but you have to consider how this will impact the school's CPF score, and you have to make sure that it is in alignment with other state and local requirements for lending. So just something to consider there. Budget considerations. So again, economies of scale don't happen until typically later in the charter school's life cycle. And new schools typically have a higher facility cost than established schools because they are still at a smaller student enrollment. And so just considering how your budget will be impacted by a larger percent of it going to facilities in the early years of the school. So just having a plan for how you're going to accommodate that, knowing that facilities typically are a fixed cost. Again, just being aware of local regulations, building codes or ADA compliance things. Zoning is a big one. If your building needs to be rezoned, and there are going to be challenges with that with your local zoning office, just something to be aware of. That can be a huge time delay in the pre-opening process. And so just something to consider as you're selecting a site. And then finally, the timeline to get a certificate of occupancy. If you don't have a CO, you can't put people in the building, means you can't start school. So that is one of those deadlines that just can't get moved. You have to have it before you can start being a school and operating. So making sure that the work that needs to get done in order to get the CO and be in the building can actually be completed in the period of time that you're contemplating for the pre-opening checklist process. And again, just highlighting here the Godot facility requirements again. The facility why. So this should be a piece where a petitioner should be able to clearly explain the facility plan, both during the petition itself and the capacity interview. So why do you think your plan is sufficient? Why do you think it's going to work for your school? What is the rationale behind the locations that you've selected? Has the school done some sort of cost benefit analysis? You know, is this one site closer to a MARTA line than another, and that might be beneficial because you're not planning to provide transportation, things like that. The school's just going to want to consider being able to explain the facility process or the facility selection in the larger school build out process. And then again, does the school's location meet the needs of the anticipated student population? So this should all be in alignment with the school's transportation plans and be thought out in terms of the target population that you're looking to serve. If you're planning to offer, you know, your school up to a community that has been traditionally underserved in a low socioeconomic area, and it's very hard to get to, and you have no facility support or transportation plan, might just have some questions about that, about how the logistics of getting people to and from your school, what that looks like on a day-to-day basis. So you're just going to want to be prepared to talk a little bit about that. And then last on the facilities piece is the who. So each petitioning group should have someone directly affiliated with the school identified to lead the facility efforts. This is going to feel very much like a full-time job during the pre-opening phase. And so you want to make sure that you have someone who understands what the time commitment is going to look like to get the building off the ground and is prepared to dedicate that to the actual process during the pre-opening year. And that person should be identified going into the petition. The governing board should consider what type of expertise it needs for its proposed facility plan. So if you plan on doing ground up construction, you might want someone with a construction background on your team. If you are planning to do a lot of negotiations around a developer build out, you might want someone with a strong legal or financial background to be able to vet those agreements so you can save some money during the pre-opening year on other professional supports to do that work for you. If you are going to be looking for a site to rehab and move into, you might want someone with some real estate experience on your team. Those are just some different types of scenarios to consider, but you want to make sure that you have someone identified with the technical skills necessary to do this work, and whether that be board member, proposed school leader, that type of thing. And petitioners should be prepared to address questions related to the board's role in the facility selection process. So if you have a plan to hire someone to handle facility selection and support as a part of the pre-opening process, the board should just be prepared to explain how that works, what that relationship is going to look like, and how they're going to oversee that vendor to make sure that work is done. I will also just note, again, I mentioned the facility services unit at the Georgia Department of Education. They are a great team. We work very closely with them, and they are always really available to answer questions that folks might have. I just always like to add the caveat after you have viewed their website. So there's a lot of resources on the facility service units page. There's some resources specifically directed towards charter schools. And so I really encourage you to go there first, see if that can respond to your question, and if not, follow up with their staff. All right, switching from facilities, we're going to talk through community engagement and enrollment. So this has been touched on in a couple of other presentations in terms of financial implications and what it's going to look like to demonstrate community support. But as a part of the pre-opening line of thought, we're going to be seeing if the petitioner has demonstrated that there is an area of need for the school. So you want to have a proposed student population, information about those characteristics of the students, the schools that they might be coming from, a demonstrated effort related to community engagement. Again, that goes back to the demonstrated community need that Erin talked about this morning. And then evidence of demand, because as Carmen mentioned during her financial portion, that's how you get funded, is based on the number of students who come to your school. And so we want to make sure that you are proposing a plan that will lead to the school being financially sustainable, because you have enough kids enrolled in your school to make the numbers work. So again, that clear understanding of how your community engagement work directly ties back to your proposed enrollment figures and your projected revenue. So this should be a thread that's woven between any sort of pre-opening question, any sort of enrollment question, any sort of budget notes in your petition itself. And then again, as Carmen mentioned, attainable and sustainable enrollment projections based on evidence-based community demand. You don't want your number to be driving your budget. You want to make sure that you are making an educated determination as to why that's the year one target number. You want to do that based on what you think you can get in year one. And so just making sure that you're picking your enrollment projections based on what actual community demand looks like. In terms of funding and support, so each petitioning school should be able to demonstrate a realistic understanding of costs and requirements during the pre-opening year. So this is before you start getting money from the state in terms of QBE or supplement funds, because you don't have kids yet. So you need to have a realistic understanding of what sort of costs and requirements are going to be involved during the pre-opening year and be able to account for those in your year zero budget. So having a plan for how you're going to be able to address the various needs during your pre-opening year is going to be critical. You're going to want to include that in both your petition and be prepared to speak to it during your capacity interview. It should be highlighted in your budget. You should have a clear plan for it. If you're going to include additional revenues from grants and things like that, please make sure that you are providing documentation to support those. There'll be more information about that during the budget template webinar, as well as in the petition itself. But just make sure that if you say that you're going to have a lot of additional revenue to support that work, you know where that's coming from and you have documentation to support it. And then lastly, pre-opening team capacity. So what are reviewers looking for? They're going to want to know who is on your pre-opening team, who in the room when they're talking to the team during the capacity interview, who in the room is actually going to be involved in opening the school. Do you already have a school leader that's identified who's going to be charged with doing a lot of this work? What role does the governing board play in the pre-opening process? You know, have they already made the commitment to be able to be involved in this and are demonstrating that they're willing to commit the time to it as needed? What vendors need to be involved and at what point? And how are you going to pay for those vendors if they are needing to be involved? And then the larger stakeholder community. So do you have a deep bench of volunteers who are prepared to go knocking on doors, manage sign-up sheets for local community events, that sort of thing? So just be thinking about who is on your pre-opening team who can help get the work done. Again, what role will they play? So who is responsible for each of the pre-opening requirements and how much support are they going to need to do those tasks? So if you come in and say the school leader is going to handle all things pre-opening, we might ask some follow-up questions about how are you going to make sure that they have the capacity and skill set necessary to do all those things. So you're going to want to be thinking about that when from topics as broad as facilities to hiring and marketing and enrollment, and making sure that you have enough capacity dedicated to these tasks in order to actually get open. And then finally, are there any special skills that you're going to need during the pre-opening phase? So if there are folks on your board that you want to specifically highlight and target in terms of their capacity during the founding phase of your board, as opposed to once a school is like fully operational. So are those positions already identified? Do you already have someone on the team who has that capacity? And if not, how are you going to fill those gaps? How do you identify what gaps you have and find the appropriate professionals to join the board and dedicate the time necessary during the pre-opening year? And again, it's the question of, will you need a volunteer or a vendor? So some of these, there are a number of folks in the industry whose bread and butter is to help schools get open in their specific area of expertise. And so that is great. We love having those folks in the arena. You just have to be able to pay for them as the school, right? You need to be able to oversee it and make sure that you are aware of what they're going to be working on to make sure you hold them accountable for the work in order to actually get open. So that was just sort of a quick overview of the pre-opening process as it relates to the petition and capacity interview itself. I will just pause briefly and make sure we don't have any questions. There is a question here about explaining the difference between a founding board and a governing board. So there doesn't necessarily have to be a difference. So some schools will say that we have a founding board who is in charge of, putting together the petition and helping us get launched off the ground, but the board members might not have an intent to stay beyond year 1 or 2. Versus that this is the governing board who's going to run the school. They know that they're going to be doing pre-opening, and I would expect to see a number of them at renewal 5 years down the line. So it's just, if you plan to have more of a founding board with folks that are planning to roll off, we might just have some more questions about what is the transition plan. So like Saron said, if you have all of your board members who petitioned to the SCSC rolling off directly after approval, that might cause some concern. Or rolling off in year 1 of operations, everyone's rolling off at the same time. That might just trigger some additional questions and concern. So that's sort of the piece there. Some boards call themselves founding boards versus governing boards. Technically, there's no real difference. But if you are thinking of yourself as more of a founding board, that just might be things to consider. Alrighty, and I do not see any other questions in the chat. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Scott, to talk a little bit about academics. And Scott, give me 1 second. I'm gonna get you keyboard and mouse control.
All right, thank you, Kristen.
Should be good to go.
Okay, great. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Scott Riley. I work on the research and evaluation team, and my team's role within staffing the commission is to determine whether state charter schools are meeting academic standards as outlined on the comprehensive performance framework. And so I'll be taking you through the academic expectations of your petition. Right, to give you kind of a brief overview of what I'll be talking about, we're going to start with academic accountability, which, as I said, is what my division really concentrates on. I'll take you through the expectations for your school's academic program, as well as the assessment plan that you'll be putting forward. I am not going to read the mission to you. I am sure you've seen it many times today, but what I do want to hone in on is just that that phrase, better educational opportunity, because that's ultimately the standard you'll be judged on as we're talking through academic accountability and our expectations for your school. And we start talking about academic accountability because in order to get your petition approved, you must convince the reviewers that you'll be a successful school. And so this, as I said, is in line with the SCSC's mission and vision. Successful means having an academic program that meets SCSC standards and earns you that 5-year renewal at the end of your charter term. And so it's important that you know how you can go about achieving that goal. On the academic section of the Comprehensive Performance Framework, we utilize several of the College and Career Readiness Performance Index, or CCRPI indicators, as listed here, in determining whether your school has outperformed its attendance zone comparison. We also utilize a value add and then the Godot's beating the odds designation. I will say, due to disruptions to testing caused by the pandemic and then kind of the resulting data limitations from that, we've been without several of these indicators for the last 3 school years. However, we should be using most, if not all of them, going forward. But I did want to just address that, as if you look at the last few years of our CPF, you'll see that several of these measures have not been included. And so when determining how your school has performed relative to the attendance zone, we calculate the comparison score using 2 different measures. And those are the district weighted comparison score and then the school weighted comparison score. And so I'll kind of take you through how those calculations are reached. So your district weighted comparison score is the school score weighted to the proportion of students from the districts in which your charter school enrolls. So if you were serving one county, it would just be that district's score. If you are serving multiple counties or multiple school districts, we would then apply weights depending on the share of students you are pulling from each district. The school weighted comparison score works very similarly. However, it's a slightly more precise measure because rather than looking just at the district you are pulling from, we're looking at the specific schools based on the student record address report. We're looking to see where these students would be zoned to go to school, and then we are weighting your comparison score accordingly. So depending on the share of students coming from each school, the scores achieved by that school are weighted into your comparison score. So now we'll go over the academic program portion of your petition. So there are 4 components to that academic program. Those are your education model, your instructional methods and educational practices, standards and curriculum, and then finally assessment. And later in this presentation, we'll hone in on kind of the assessment portion. That's a really critical to your school's success. All right. So starting with education model, this is your school's overall approach to teaching and learning to be used at your charter school. So we provided here some examples of different educational models, such as STEM, arts infused, dual language, college prep, project-based learning. These are some common ones, but this is not an all-inclusive list, as I'm sure you know. It's just to kind of provide you with some different ideas of the educational models that are out there. But you can and should use one that you see fit and will best serve the population you intend to serve. The State Charter Schools Commission, we say we are model agnostic, meaning we don't have a preference of one of these models versus another. What we're looking to see is, can you provide kind of a coherent and cohesive rationale for why you have chosen the specific model that you've chosen, and how you see that translating into these sort of academic results that we're looking to see. I will caution you against trying to add in all of the innovative programs and teaching strategies into your model. A lot of times we will see this on petitions where people try to include too many models, and when it comes time for an interview, or even within the petition itself, it is sometimes difficult to get across kind of how this works coherently. And so I'll provide you on the next slide what an exemplary response would look like on your petition. All right, so what we're first looking to see is, where is it that you intend to locate? And then in turn, how does the model that you've selected best address the needs of that community, or of the students you intend to serve? So historically, we've seen greater success from our schools that have provided some kind of survey data and assess a need, and then can provide us with some evidence that there is in fact a desire or a need for the model that you've chosen. And I believe we've had petitioners who set out with one model, maybe petitioned a community and got responses maybe they weren't expecting, and have adjusted the model they've selected based on those responses. And I think that's to your benefit if you can demonstrate that what you're doing here is really trying to serve a specific need. And so we're looking for you to, again, provide that rationale or some reasons for why you've chosen the model. Give us a breakdown, maybe 3 to 5 reasons of why you believe this is the best model. And again, any evidence you can provide is always helpful. It could focus on the demographics of the area, or maybe the opportunities it will provide. Perhaps there's a workforce need there in the community you intend to serve, and the model you've chosen fits that need. And then finally, if you can provide us any research to back the effectiveness of this chosen model. Does research say that your proposed education model is effective? What does it indicate about student outcomes using this education model? What level of student achievement do you anticipate seeing as a result of selecting this model? And so any of that information that you're able to provide is a boon to your petition. Next, I want to move to instructional methods and then educational practice. and kind of delineate the differences here. We want to know what instructional methods and educational practices you'll be implementing to carry out that model that you've selected. Your instructional methods are the how-to of your lesson delivery. And so, for example, this might include like project-based learning, blended learning, differentiation within the classroom to meet different student needs, or perhaps a mastery learning program. We want you to tell us not what instructional methods you chose, but also, or not only which ones you chose, but also why you chose them, and why it is you feel they're the best choice. Again, this is another area where you can tie in research to support your decision, and this should reflect the students or the community that you intend to serve. And then this is very important. Make sure that you're including how you'll utilize data to inform and drive these instructional methods. Data-driven instruction should not just be part of your practice. You really want this to be part of the culture of your school, because what we're doing on our end is looking at how your model, how your practices are translating into student achievement and student growth. And so how are you utilizing student data to kind of improve on instructional practices? A lot of schools will have maybe a data wall or a data room. It should be part of your weekly staff meetings, reviewing data. If you're utilizing the professional learning communities or PLCs, teachers should be collaborating, sharing data, sharing best practices. Educational practices are the structure of classrooms and school operations to support your academic program. Here, some examples here are looping, that might, which would mean having your teachers travel through the grade levels with a specific cohort. You might have multi-grade classrooms where students are teaching those of the younger grade level. You might implement a year-round calendar. And so we'll want to see some example of what your intended educational practices are. And here again, a model response in this category will provide research reasoning behind the selected methods and practices, and describe for us how they're going to tie into your model. I will say there is a word limit here, so just be cognizant of that. Hit the highlights for us of the provided research. Please don't repeat the entire source text. So after talking about instructional methods and education practices, the petition is then going to have you kind of delve in further into your planned curriculum. And when choosing a curriculum, you're going to want to ensure that it is aligned to state standards. I'll probably say this 4 or 5 more times before I'm done. Your state standards are concise written descriptions of what students are expected to know and be able to do at a specific stage of their education. However, standards do not describe any particular teaching practice, curriculum, or assessment. Those are for you to determine, with the exception of those mandated assessments. Learning standards map out specific sequences of knowledge and skills that students are expected to learn as they progress through their education, including kind of overarching long-term educational goals. When I was teaching, these are what we called SWABOTs, or students will be able to do. This is what students should be able to do when they have completed their public school education. That's what you'll find outlined in state standards. And here we have just one example of an ELA standard for you. But if you visit Godot's website, all of the state standards are there outlined for you. So state standards are your roadmap to what needs to be taught. The curriculum is how you're going to get there. Curriculum are the lessons and academic content taught in schools or in a specific course or program. Schools will frequently purchase kind of a comprehensive multi-grade curriculum package. These are often purchased on by a particular subject area. So you might have a chosen math curriculum, a chosen ELA curriculum, one for science, one for social studies. Curricula is typically acquired, and then it is typical that you will tweak it in order to better align it with standards, as well as your school's mission and vision. There again, teachers may develop their own learning materials to supplement the curriculum that you have purchased. But again, I will say that your curriculum, the chosen curriculum, must be aligned with state standards. All curriculum providers that you're shopping with will promise you that their curriculum is aligned to Georgia state standards. But you must do your homework, you must do your due diligence to ensure that's actually the case. You are almost guaranteed to receive a question, should you reach the petition interview, about how you went about ensuring that your curriculum aligned, what processes you went through to make sure there was that alignment. Teachers and school leadership often do curriculum mapping to ensure this kind of alignment. We'll expect to see a staffing plan that supports that work, and dedicated scheduled time to make the curriculum mapping happen. If your curricula is not solidified at the time of your petition submission, content should clearly explain the school's vetting procedure and the timeline for when curriculum decisions will be made. So I kind of spoke about this earlier, but again, what we want to see within your petition is that you can provide kind of a cohesive idea of how your chosen model, how your instructional practices, and then the curricula that you've chosen are going to fit into this educational program that you intend to offer. And then how does this complement the school's mission and vision? An exemplary response here may include a discussion of instructional methods and instructional practices to be employed. You'll want to give us a walkthrough in the day of a life at of a student at your school, and then include a school schedule and your professional development plan, as well as the budget that's going to support all of these proposed programs. If we're looking at your petition and we can't make sense of how all of these different things will work together, it will not fare well as we're reviewing the petition. All right, so as I said, assessment is going to be a very important part of your academic program. Assessment is the systematic collection, review, and use of information about educational programs in order to assess what students know in order to improve learning and development. So why is assessment so important? To get your charter approved, you need to convince reviewers that your school be high quality as well as sustainable. High quality and sustainable means you will meet SCSC academic standards each year of your charter term. Our academic standards include a variety of measures, as we went over earlier, which rely on those statewide mandatory summative assessments, known as the Georgia milestones. And the milestones are going to be aligned, as we talked about, to the Georgia standards of excellence, or our state standards. Additionally, you're going to want to implement interim assessments in order to track student progress throughout the year. So at the time of those summative assessments, at the end of the year, there are no surprises. So you'll want to include interim assessments that are aligned to Georgia milestones, as well as those Georgia standards of excellence within your petition. So this feeds into your assessment plan. Assessment plans should include information from a variety of sources collected during various points in time, including but not limited to benchmark assessments and summative assessments. I want to reiterate, it is very important that the assessments that you have chosen, these interim assessments, these benchmark assessments, that they have some alignment or close alignment with the Georgia Standards of Excellence. And then finally, we have our mandatory state assessments, the Georgia milestones. State charter schools are not exempt from these and cannot waive participation in any mandatory state assessments. Make sure you review the Georgia Department of Education's For Educators assessment page to get an idea of your responsibilities during assessments. You'll want to clearly identify who will serve in the different roles identified in the Student Assessment Handbook and provide a brief overview of what duties and responsibilities in that role include. State charter schools often have limited staff. It should not be one person's responsibility to handle all of assessment. However, one person's responsibilities may overlap with other identified roles. You want to draft an assessment calendar that includes testing windows for all of the mandatory statewide assessments and any interim assessments the schools identified. In scheduling each assessment, schools must adhere to the testing times prescribed in the examiner's manuals. If you allow too much or too little time, this may result in an invalidation of your students' test scores. Include the commitment to attend relevant Godot trainings and conferences. If your school spans across grade bands, in other words, if you're serving grades K through 12, you may want an overall testing administrator who coordinates with Godot or the Georgia Department of Ed, but then you'll want a different person to serve as a testing coordinator for each grade band. Testing or assessment is a big time commitment. It may be a red flag to us if your plan is to only have the school leader or one person, again, responsible for all of these duties. So that brings me to your assessment plan. You'll want to provide us with an assessment checklist. Understand the role that assessment results play in your accountability. You want to be aware of which assessments are mandatory and how to effectively implement them. Again, you're selecting or developing your own interim assessments. And this is going to drive that kind of data-driven instruction that we discussed earlier. So 4 to 6 times a year, you'll want to provide these common interim assessments. I'll say it one more time, make sure there is alignment to the state test and your state standards. And then you're going to want to utilize your students' results to reteach and reassess. You should be, throughout the school year, looking to see how your students are performing based on these state standards. If your students are not achieving mastery of these standards, you will want to review this, reteach, reassess in order to get them where they need to be by the time those summative assessments come around. Make sure you have a staffing plan that supports elements proposed in your assessment plan. Again, this should not fall on the shoulders of just one person. And then make sure that the school calendar and your school schedule support the elements proposed in your assessment plan. All right, so here we just have a list of the statewide mandatory assessments, and depending on which grades you intend to serve, will dictate which of these you will need to participate. As discussed earlier, we will utilize the CCRPI scores resulting from your Georgia Milestones results for all students served in grades 3 through 12 in making determinations about your academic performance on the comprehensive performance framework. Here again, we have an exemplary response of what we would want your assessment plan to include on your petition. You want to discuss what assessments and data management systems will be used by the school. We have different types of assessments. So your formative, this is going to assess students' performance during instruction and usually occurs regularly throughout the instruction process. The interim or benchmark assessments we talked about, this evaluates student performance at periodic intervals, meant to help predict performance on those end-of-year summative assessments. Your summative assessment measures the student's achievement at the end of instruction or at the end of a course. You have norm referenced assessments. These compare a student's performance against a national normed group to see how you stack up nationally, and then criterion referenced, which measures a student's performance against a goal, objective, or standard. You want to explain how the school will make adjustments to instructional methods, again, based on your student data. Discuss how the school will ensure that its assessments align to the Georgia Standards of Excellence. I cannot stress enough the importance and critical nature of ensuring that your assessments are aligned to GSE. Provide information on how your school will use milestones data in the promotion and retention decisions. State charter schools do have flexibility to waive the Georgia milestones in promotion and retention decisions. Explain how the school staffing plan and school calendar support your proposed assessment plan. I would highly encourage you to go to the Georgia Department of Education's assessment page to learn about all of these obligations and requirements. And then I also want to highlight for you two great resources that the Department of Education's assessment team provides. These are DRC Beacon and TestPad, and both of these are aligned to those Georgia Standards of Excellence. DRC Beacon is the through-year computer adaptive formative assessment system administered in ELA and mathematics for grades 3 through 8. And then TestPad contains items related to content areas assessed in the Georgia Milestones assessment, as well as NAEP. Teachers and administrators can utilize TestPad to develop formative and summative assessments aligned to those state standards. So this will be a big help in developing your interim assessments and making sure that they have that alignment. All right, and then finally, we have the statewide longitudinal data system, or SLDS. The statewide longitudinal data system is a free application from Godot that provides access to historical data, including assessments, attendance, enrollment, courses, and grades, beginning with the 2006 and 2007 school year. SLDS is designed to help district schools and teachers make informed, data-driven decisions to improve student learning. You'll want to choose a student information system, or SIS, that is compatible with SLDS. So when selecting that, make sure that compatibility exists. And here we have some examples for you of commonly used SIS. Once approved, or once your petitioner is approved, scheduled to receive training on the SLDS, Godot staff is very helpful and it comes at no cost to the school. I will note, if you partner with a CMO or EMO or any other vendor that wants to provide a student information system, just make sure in your agreement you're specific that the SIS will be made compatible with SLDS, and then because without it, you lose the ability to see those years of prior student performance for students who may be new to your school, and you will lose access to kind of timely results of student test results. All right, and so I know that was quite a bit. I'm not sure, Kristen, if I received any questions throughout. I was not monitoring the chat.
I do not see any here related to academics, so I think you're good.
Okay, well, if any questions do arise, I've provided my email here. Again, my name is Scott Riley. I'm the Academic Evaluation Manager. Please feel free to reach out, and I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Great, thank you, Scott. And with that, we are wrapped up for the end of the day. So we will leave the chat box open here for a few more minutes in case folks had any lingering questions. We tried to answer a number throughout the day, whether it was verbally and throughout the presentations, or if you had a really specific or nuanced question, try to respond directly via the question feature. Additionally, we got a number of questions about, can I get a copy of this training? And so the answer to that is yes. We will be sending out all the training materials following this training, just to make sure that everyone has access to the recording, the slide decks, and then there will be a number of additional Petitioner resources that some of the other presentations kind of teed up throughout the day. That'll be going out as well. So please be on the lookout for communication from our office with those materials, and check out our website. We always have a ton of things there. And with that, I did want to pause and turn it over to our Executive Director, Donovan Head, just for some brief closing remarks before we end the day.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Donovan Head. I'm the Executive Director of the State Charter Schools Commission. I'm new to the team, just been here for a little over 2 months, but I just want to say thank you to everyone for spending the day with us. I hope you found the information that was shared with you very helpful. I can assure you that following this information as guidance over the next few months will definitely result in positive outcomes. And I also want to thank our team for all the hard work and the preparation and presentations and facilitation that went involved with this. A lot of it predated me coming even on the team. We look forward to seeing many great petitions throughout the cycle here. Wish you all the best of luck. And if there's anything we can ever do to help, if you have any questions along the way after this session, please reach out to us. We're all here to help. And it's a very dedicated team. Thank you.
Thanks, Donovan. And like I said, we're going to leave the chat open for 1 or 2 more minutes just to make sure any lingering questions that come in can get answered. But if you don't have any other questions, thank you for joining us today. And like I said, please be on the lookout for additional emails from our office. Join our newsletter to make sure you stay up to date on anything petitions related. And we look forward to hearing from you again soon. Thank you. All right, seeing no more questions, I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar. Thanks, y'all.